Chapter 1331. In the starry sky, Moon Yinyan glanced at Yi Xian and sighed. I didn't expect you to be involved with the whirling world again. Yi Xian smiled. Sister Nian, this gourd is very powerful. Moon Yinyan glanced at the gourd in Yi Xian's hand. The Qiankuan gourd. Yi Xian blinked. Sister Nian knows it? Moon Yinyan sized up the gourd. How did you escape from the whirling world? Gourd Immortal snorted. Who are you? Why should I answer you? Yi Xian, at this moment, Moon Yinyan suddenly disappeared. Gourd Immortal suddenly laughed. How dare you come in? This great Immortal will let you see. Ah. Meanwhile, numerous shrill and miserable cries suddenly resounded. The gourd trembled violently in the starry sky. Yi Xian knew that the gourd had been hammered. After a long time, the gourd completely withered. At this moment, Moon Yinyan appeared beside Yi Xian and clapped her hands. You're asking for a beating. Gourd Immortal trembled. Who are you? Moon Yinyan said indifferently, how did you escape? Gourd Immortal asked again, woman, who are you? Moon Yinyan smiled and rubbed her hands. Do you want to be beaten again? Gourd Immortal hurriedly said, I sneaked out. Moon Yinyan fell silent. Yi Xian looked at Moon Yinyan. Should I send it back? Gourd Immortal hurriedly said, no. Brother, don't send me back. I'll follow you, okay? Yi Xian, Moon Yinyan suddenly said softly, forget it. Let it follow you. It will be very useful to you in the short term. Yi Xian hesitated, then said, whirling world. Moon Yinyan chuckled. Since it's delivered to my doorstep, it would be a waste not to take it. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. I'm afraid that the Saha world will come and beat me up. Moon Yinyan looked at Yi Xian. What will come will come. Yi Xian was speechless. Moon Yinyan suddenly looked up at the sky and said softly, doubting should be moving soon. You have to be mentally prepared. Yi Xian looked up at the depths of the starry sky. How would doubting deal with the five-dimensional universe this time? If it was him, how would he deal with the five-dimensional universe? As if he had thought of something, Yi Xian suddenly said, Sister Nian, let's chat another day. With that, he turned around and disappeared below. Moon Yinyan glanced at Yi Xian, who had disappeared from his sight, and shook his head with a smile. Little guy. Yi Xian returned to the five-dimensional hall. He looked for Guan Yin and Senior Sister Lu of the Sword Sect. Yi Xian looked at the two of them. Guan Yin, Senior Sister Lu, I have something I need you to do. Guan Yin was curious. What is it? Yi Xian also called Shaoling out and said in a deep voice. Find the Sword Sect. Sword Sect? Guan Yin frowned slightly. What do you mean? Senior Sister Lu also looked at Yi Xian. She was puzzled. Yi Xian smiled. I came here from the lower world and have seen many Sword Sect. The founder of these Sword Sect is the same person, the man in green robe. Senior Sister Lu suddenly said. I know. It was founded by some of his fellow disciples. Some of them survived. But some have disappeared in the long river of history. Yi Xian nodded. There must be other relics of the Sword Sect. Senior Sister Lu said in a deep voice. What do you want to do? Yi Xian said. Find the box. Box. Hearing these two words, Shaoling's eyes suddenly lit up. Senior Sister Lu looked at Yi Xian. That little guy's box. Yi Xian nodded. According to my guess, that little guy is very playful. So, she must have left a box somewhere else, and that box will be of great help to us. Guan Yin was a little confused, but Senior Sister Lu was very clear on what was going on. The box left by the white little guy was not ordinary. Senior Sister Lu said after a moment of silence. I know of a Sword Sect relic. Hearing this, Yi Xian was a little excited. Come, let's go. Senior Sister Lu nodded. Yi Xian gazed at Guan Yin. Send someone to search throughout the entire fifth dimension. Don't let go of those minor worlds and remote worlds. Notify me immediately if you find any relics of the Sword Sect. Guan Yin nodded. All right. I'll do it right away. As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and left. It didn't take long for countless experts to start searching for the relics of the Sword Sect throughout the fifth dimension. After Guan Yin left, Yi Xian suddenly gazed at Senior Sister Lu and said, Senior Sister Lu, help me look at something. As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his right hand, and an ice coffin suddenly appeared here. Senior Sister Lu frowned slightly. What's that? Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. A mysterious senior gave it to me. He said that the green-clothed man asked him to protect it, and he gave it to me when the time came. Senior Sister Lu gazed at Yi Xian. He left it behind? Yi Xian nodded. Do you know who's in the coffin? Senior Sister Lu asked, Can I open it? Yi Xian shook his head. No, there's a powerful sword energy within the coffin. Moreover, opening it like this isn't particularly respectful to the person within the coffin. Actually, he wasn't afraid of the sword energy because the sword spirit was there. However, opening it like this was too abrupt. Senior Sister Lu gazed at the coffin for a long time before she spoke softly. I think I know who it is. Yi Xian hurriedly asked. Who? Senior Sister Lu glanced at Yi Xian. You'll know when the time comes. Yi Xian was speechless. Senior Sister Lu said, Protect this coffin well. Your family owes it to them. Yi Xian frowned slightly. My family? Senior Sister Lu spoke indifferently. In any case, it's a form of karma. Just protect it well. Yi Xian was speechless. Senior Sister Lu also liked to whet his appetite. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian took out a token. This was given to him by the mysterious powerhouse in the land of origin, who said that he could do him a favor. When he was in the underworld, he wanted to use this token. However, he didn't choose to use it in the end because at that time, even if he called a Dao validation powerhouse, it would be useless. According to his guess, that mysterious powerhouse should be a Dao validation powerhouse. Now, he needed to use all the power he could to fight against doubting. At this moment, Senior Sister Lu suddenly said, Let's go to the Sword Sect ruins. Yi Xian nodded. He put away the ice coffin and disappeared from the hall with Senior Sister Lu. In the vast starry sky, Yi Xian and Senior Sister Lu flew on their swords. Yi Xian suddenly said, Senior Sister Lu, can you contact the founder of the Sword Sect? Senior Sister Lu shook her head. I can't. Yi Xian was silent. Senior Sister Lu smiled. You don't have the confidence to face it yourself? Yi Xian said softly, The world is difficult. I don't want to struggle anymore. Senior Sister Lu, Yi Xian suddenly smiled. Senior Sister Lu, other forces can summon their founder. Why can't the Sword Sect do the same? Senior Sister Lu smiled. They already did it once. Yi Xian was silent. He knew it was the woman with the spear. Senior Sister Lu suddenly said, Can you reach the Dao validation realm? Yi Xian shook his head. He still couldn't reach the Dao validation realm. He could only rely on the God's seal to reach the Dao validation realm. And this borrowed power was still inferior to the power he cultivated. But he also knew that this matter couldn't be rushed. Without thinking too much, Yi Xian and Senior Sister Lu sped up. In the fifth dimension. In the courtyard, Yi Jiming, who was reading a book, suddenly stopped. She turned her head and saw a man standing not far away. Yi Jiming said calmly, Bangsu, you are quite patient. You only came out now. The man named Bangsu walked to Yi Jiming's side and said in a deep voice, The patriarch has ordered us to bring you back. Yi Jiming said softly, Bangsu, you have followed me for so long. You should have some understanding of young Master Yi, right? Bengsu said in a deep voice, that young Master Yi is a genius, rare in the world. Yi Jiming looked at Bengsu. Go back and tell him that I won't go back. Bengsu hesitated for a moment and said, the patriarch has said, dead or alive. Dead or alive. Yi Jiming sneered. Dead or alive? It seems that the Tao scriptures are always more important to him than the people around him. Speaking of this, she suddenly thought of Yi Xian. She thought of the scene when Yi Xian gave her 2 Tao scriptures in the netherworld. Her biological father couldn't be compared to a man she had only known for a few months. 2 Tao scriptures. If they were in De Yuan, her father would have been willing to sacrifice the entire clan. What about Yi Xian? Thinking of Yi Xian, Yi Jiming suddenly shook her head and smiled. At this moment, her heart felt warm. Bengsu sighed softly. Sorry. With that, he was about to attack when a woman suddenly appeared behind him. It was San Sheng. Seeing San Sheng, Bengsu's expression changed drastically. San Sheng looked at Bengsu. You want to fight? Bengsu looked at San Sheng with fear in his eyes. San Sheng looked at Yi Jiming not far away. He told me that someone might be looking for trouble with you. I didn't believe it at first, but I didn't expect it to be true. At this moment, a sword light suddenly appeared in the field. It was Arrow. Arrow looked at Bengsu in the distance. He said that Jiming is his friend. Knowing Destiny is his friend, so no one can make trouble for her. Bengsu was silent. Arrow continued. He also said that he won't kill you this time. He asked you to go back and tell De Yuan that if Jiming doesn't want to go back, De Yuan shouldn't force her to go back. Bengsu glanced at Yi Jiming not far away and turned to leave. He knew that with these 2 women around, he couldn't take Yi Jiming away. After Bengsu left, Yi Jiming looked at Arrow and 30. Did he ask you to protect me in secret? Arrow nodded. Yi Jiming was silent. No one knew what he was thinking. Somewhere in the distant starry sky, 2 sword lights streaked across the starry sky like meteors, bright and dazzling. About half an hour later, Senior Sister Lu suddenly stopped. She looked into the distance and said softly, there's a sword sect relic in front. Yi Xian looked into the distance and said softly, I hope she buried the box, Senior Sister Lu. P.S. On the last day of this month, vote for those with guaranteed monthly votes. Chapter 1332. In front of Yi Xian and Senior Sister Lu was an endless mountain range, and in the depths of the mountain range, several palaces could be vaguely seen. At this moment, Yi Xian also sensed the sword intent. And it was a very strong sword intent. Yi Xian asked softly, Senior Sister Lu, what is this sword sect? Senior Sister Lu answered softly, it was founded by one of his senior brothers. Let's go and have a look. Yi Xian nodded. Soon, they came to a mountain gate. The gate was several meters wide, and there were 2 big black words on the gate, Sword Sect. The words were bold and powerful, as if they were carved by a sharp sword. Behind the gate was a Shao Dao with endless stone steps. Yi Xian and Senior Sister Lu slowly walked up the stone steps to the Shao Dao. The Shao Dao was deserted, and the weeds on both sides were several meters high. Obviously, no one had been here for a long time. Yi Xian asked softly, why is it so deserted? Senior Sister Lu looked around, and her eyes flickered, they should be dead. Yi Xian was silent. There were no traces of fighting here, which meant that the people here were either dead or had left. Soon, the 2 of them arrived before a large hall. In front of the palace was a huge stone statue of the green-robed man, and on his shoulder was the little white guy. Yi Xian quickly called Shao Linger out. Shao Linger sniffed and walked to the statue of the green-robed man. She lightly stamped the ground with her little feet, and after a while, she turned to look at Yi Xian and shook her head. Yi Xian asked softly, no? Senior Sister Lu suddenly said, maybe he has never been here. Looking at the disappointed Shao Linger, Yi Xian smiled, it's okay, we will definitely meet him in the future. Shao Linger quickly nodded. Yi Xian looked at senior sister Lu. Let's go. Senior sister Lu nodded slightly, and the two of them were about to leave. However, at this moment, the sound of a sword suddenly rang out from the hall behind them. Both of them stopped. Yi Xian turned around and a voice suddenly rang out in the hall. A familiar aura. Sect Master? His voice was trembling, and it was obvious that he was very excited. Sect Leader? Yi Xian looked at senior sister Lu, who said softly, let's go in and take a look. Yi Xian nodded. The two of them walked into the great hall. In the great hall, a sword floated in the air, and the voice came from the sword. When the two of them walked into the main hall, the voice sounded again. You are not the sect leader. Yi Xian sized up the sword and said, you are? The man suddenly said, your bloodline. At this time, senior sister Lu suddenly asked, who are you? The sword trembled and turned into a middle-aged man. Senior sister Lu looked at the middle-aged man, I don't know you. She basically knew all the people around him. Of course, except for some women. The middle-aged man glanced at senior sister Lu and said, I'm the sect leader of this sword sect. Senior sister Lu said, who's the founding ancestor of your sword sect? When she spoke up to this point, she seemed to have thought of something and said, I mean the one who founded this sword sect. The middle-aged man spoke in a low voice, you mean the founding ancestor Tingyun? Tingyun. Senior sister Lu was slightly stunned, and then she said softly, so it's her. Yi Xian looked at senior sister Lu, you know her? Senior sister Lu nodded, she's the strongest in the sword Dao besides him in the sword sect, and her talent is the highest as well. As she spoke, she looked at the middle-aged man, why has this sword sect become like this? The middle-aged man smiled bitterly, we've encountered a calamity. Senior sister Lu frowned slightly, calamity? The middle-aged man nodded, in the past, our sword sect had a sacred artifact called sword scripture. It was left behind by the founding ancestor. But since founding ancestor Tingyun left, the Dao Ting coveted it. In the end, senior sister Lu's eyes narrowed slightly, the Dao Ting seized the sword scripture? The middle-aged man nodded, the Dao Ting didn't dare to touch it when founding ancestor Tingyun was here. But after founding ancestor Tingyun left, the Dao Ting immediately sent someone to seize the sword scripture. Senior sister Lu's expression was cold, they actually dared to seize the sword scripture. How audacious of them. The middle-aged man sighed in a low voice, we're useless. If founding ancestor Tingyun was here. Senior sister Lu looked at the middle-aged man, where's Tingyun? The middle-aged man said in a low voice, founding ancestor Tingyun left. As for where he went, I don't know. Senior sister Lu said softly, that little girl should have gone to find him. Little girl. The middle-aged man's expression became slightly strange, you are? Yi Xian quickly said, she's senior sister Lu, also from the sword sect. The middle-aged man was a little surprised, you're also from the sword sect? Senior sister Lu nodded. The middle-aged man cupped his fist, oh, you're from the same sect. Senior sister Lu pointed at the green-robed man's statue outside the hall, has he been here before? The middle-aged man said, yes, he seemed to have come to see founding ancestor Tingyun. Senior sister Lu asked again, did he leave anything behind? The middle-aged man thought for a while and then shook his head, I don't think so. Senior sister Lu was silent. Yi Xian smiled, since he didn't leave anything behind, then forget it. At this time, the middle-aged man suddenly said, but, a little white guy did leave a box behind. A box. Yi Xian and senior sister Lu were stunned. There's a box. Senior sister Lu said in a low voice, where is it? The middle-aged man turned around and pointed at the table in front of him, and there was a small box on the table. The middle-aged man said, Tingyun said that this box was a gift from that little white guy, and he asked us to keep it well. Then, our sword sect put it up for worship. Yi Xian and senior sister Lu were speechless. They even put it up for worship. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, and then said, didn't you open this box during the sword sect's calamity? The middle-aged man shook his head, no. As he spoke, he looked at the box. Is there something special about this box? Yi Xian and senior sister Lu exchanged glances, and both were speechless. Senior sister Lu suddenly said, doubting, if you open this box when someone comes, then you might have a chance to survive. The middle-aged man was astonished. How is this possible? As far as I know, that little white guy isn't very strong. Senior sister Lu shook her head. She isn't very good at fighting, but she can call for help. Call for help. Who has the most backing? It's definitely Little White. A very, very long time ago, no one dared to offend this little white guy, because offending her was equivalent to poking a hornet's nest. The middle-aged man glanced at the box and smiled bitterly. No wonder ancestor Tingyun asked us to keep it well all those years ago. But none of us took it seriously. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, and then said, can you give this box to me? Senior sister Lu rolled her eyes at Yi Xian. This guy's face is really thick, and he's asking for it directly. The middle-aged man smiled, of course. This thing is useless in our sword sect. Moreover, you are his. Senior sister Lu suddenly changed the topic, just a box. The middle-aged man nodded, just a box. Senior sister Lu looked at Yi Xian, then take it away. Yi Xian nodded slightly, and then he looked at the middle-aged man. You only have a strand of your soul left. Do you want to continue living in this world, or do you want me to send you into reincarnation? The middle-aged man smiled bitterly. Just let me perish in this world. Yi Xian shook his head. Then allow me to send you into reincarnation. As soon as he finished speaking, he opened his palm, and the divine seal of samsara appeared. It didn't take long for a path of samsara to appear in front of him. The middle-aged man's eyes were filled with astonishment when he witnessed this scene. You're actually a guardian of the Grand Tao. Yi Xian nodded. I obtained this divine seal by chance. As for the guardian of the Grand Tao, I can barely be considered as one. The middle-aged man took a deep and long glance at Yi Xian, and then he said, take care of yourself. As soon as he finished speaking, he entered the path of samsara, and it didn't take long for it to close. Yi Xian walked over to the box, and then he sized it up and spoke softly, it's that little fellow inside, right? Senior sister Lu shook her head, I don't know. Meanwhile, Xiaoling took the box in her arms. Yi Xian smiled. Xiaoling, can you sense what's inside? Xiaoling, blinked, and then she gazed at the box. A short moment later, she grinned, I'm not telling you. As soon as she finished speaking, she took the box into the pagoda. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Senior sister Lu spoke in a low voice, how do you intend to use this box? Yi Xian smiled, it's an extraordinary gift I'm leaving for the doubting. As soon as he finished speaking, he glanced at the surroundings and spoke softly, fortunately, we didn't return empty-handed. Let's go. Senior sister Lu nodded. The two of them left. However, they just left the hall when Yi Xian's expression suddenly changed drastically. He grabbed senior sister Lu's shoulder and sent her into the pagoda. Meanwhile, the sky suddenly split apart, and then a spear that carried a strand of blood-red flame stabbed down from the sky. Before this spear even landed, the entire sword sect was burned to ashes by a wave of flames. A cold smile curved the corners of Yi Xian's mouth. He opened his palm and a sword soared into the sky. Bang! The sky suddenly split apart and turned into a giant black hole. At the same time, a man appeared in the sky. The man was over 7 feet tall and had a burly physique. He wore a golden-purple beast robe, and his eyes were as sharp as swords. In his hand was a long halberd. The halberd was 12 feet long, and its shaft seemed to be forged from magma. The tip of the halberd seemed to contain the power of an Asura, and it exuded a terrifying malevolent and murderous aura that could confuse one's mind and cause one to feel a thirst for blood. He stood in the sky, and at this moment, the entire world seemed so tiny in front of him. Yi Xian looked at the man, doubting. In the sky, the man looked down at Yi Xian. I am Xian Yong, one of the 4 divine generals of doubting. Today, I have come to take your head. Yi Xian's eyes narrowed. You've made a move on Sister Nian. He knew that if these people wanted to deal with him, they would definitely stall Mu Nian. In the fifth dimension. In the starry sky, an old man stood in front of Mu Nian. It was Bai Dizzy. Mu Nian looked at Bai Dizzy and smiled. I thought you would have to wait until the fifth dimension tribulation. Bai Dizzy smiled. Miss, how about this? We'll let young Master Yi and Xian Yong fight one-on-one. I, Doubting, won't interfere, and you won't interfere either. What do you think? Mu Nian was silent. In the deepest part of the starry sky, a super array had enveloped the entire fifth dimension. If she went to save Yi Xian, this array and Doubting expert would destroy the fifth dimension. Mu Nian turned her head to look at the fifth dimension and smiled, as expected of Doubting, to be able to find my weakness so quickly. You all know that every time I make a move, the fifth dimension tribulation will arrive faster. And now, you all want to force me to make a move so that the fifth dimension tribulation will arrive earlier. Bai Dizzy looked at Mu Nian. It's not easy for Miss to cultivate to this point. Do you really want to sacrifice yourself for a human? Mu Nian smiled. He called me sister. As an elder sister, isn't protecting her younger brother a matter of course? Chapter 1333. Sister. As soon as Mu Nian said this, she shook her head and smiled. She suddenly realized that she had unknowingly acknowledged Yi Xian in her heart. It was not the same kind of acknowledgement as before. This kind of acknowledgement was as if she was treating him as family. But this feeling was not bad. At this moment, she suddenly understood the plain-dressed woman. In the past, she did not understand why the plain-dressed woman cared so much about Yi Xian. For an expert at her level, familial love and whatnot should be very, very indifferent. But at this moment, she realized that no matter how strong a person was, they were afraid of loneliness, afraid of not having someone they cared about. Loneliness was the greatest enemy of the strong. And the feeling of having someone they cared about was actually not bad. Familial love. For some people, this was a very meaningless thing, but for others, it was more important than life. She, Mu Nian, had guarded this part of the universe for many years. All these years, she was like an observer of the five-dimensional universe. She silently guarded and observed. But no one walked into her world. She did not hate people, but she did not like them either. Because people were really complicated, and they could change themselves very willfully. Good today, bad tomorrow. However, she also felt that humans were very interesting, just like familial love, friendship, and love. She had to admit that being with Yi Xian made her a lot happier. In the starry sky, Bai Dizzy looked at Mu Nian. It seems that Miss is determined to interfere in this matter. As he said this, he shook his head. Miss, you are injured, but you still want to meddle in other people's business. It is really not wise. Mu Nian collected her thoughts and said with a smile, let's wait and see. After saying this, she looked at the distant end of the starry sky. Bai Dizzy did not speak again, but looked in the direction of Yi Xian and Xian Yong. Below, Yi Xian's face was gloomy. He knew that Doubting dared to make a move because he must have stalled Sister Nian. At this moment, he was a little worried. Even though Sister Nian was powerful, she was still injured. He had to rush back. Yi Xian looked up at Xian Yong in the sky. If he wanted to rush back, he had to first deal with this person. Divine General. One of the 4 great divine generals of Doubting. In the sky, Xian Yong quietly held the halberd in his hand. A powerful pressure swept down from the sky, as if the sky was collapsing. Force. Oppressing others with force. This aura contained a domineering intent that looked down on the world, making it hard for one to breathe. Down below, Yi Xian revealed a savage smile. Bring it on. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned into a beam of sword light and soared into the sky. Chi. This sword directly broke through that powerful pressure. In the sky, Xian Yong's face was expressionless as he stabbed down with his halberd. The tip of the halberd was covered in flames that contained a monstrous spear aura. This halberd seemed like it was going to pierce through the heavens and earth. Yi Xian's sword arrived. A tit for tat. Boom! A wave of sword light suddenly shattered. This spear directly suppressed Yi Xian's sword force. However, Yi Xian did not retreat. Instead, he advanced. Holding the sword with both hands, the sword slid along the halberd and slashed towards Xian Yong's face. Xian Yong's reaction was extremely fast. The moment Yi Xian's sword changed direction, he swept the halberd in his hand. This sweep directly hit Yi Xian's sword. Boom! Yi Xian retreated several thousand feet in an instant. The moment he stopped, a cold gleam arrived. Chi! Before the halberd arrived, the cold gleam arrived first, followed by the force. Yi Xian's right foot slammed down. This chapter is not over. Please continue to the next page. He stomped on the starry sky, borrowing the power of the Tao of space to forcefully stop himself. At this moment, Xian Yong's halberd arrived. Yi Xian didn't choose to block it. If he did, he would lose momentum. The person in front of him was extremely good at gaining momentum. If he lost momentum, he would be at a complete disadvantage. Yi Xian didn't dodge or evade. He directly used his sword domain, which instantly weakened the sword aura. At this moment, Yi Xian's sword slashed down. Boom! The halberd was forced to a stop. And at this moment, Xian Yong suddenly vanished from where he was. In the distance, Yi Xian's pupils constricted. He suddenly slashed to his right, and this slash directly hit a cold gleam. Boom! The sky shook violently, and then it exploded. And at this moment, afterimages suddenly appeared around Yi Xian. These afterimages seemed to be solid, and it was impossible to distinguish which was real and which was fake. At the same time, Yi Xian retreated explosively. Within the pitch-black spatial black hole, sword lights crisscrossed, and ear-piercing explosions resounded incessantly. After retreating for about 15 minutes, those afterimages suddenly converged, and the next moment, a halberd stabbed straight at the center of Yi Xian's brows. This strike caused the heavens and the earth to tremble. Yi Xian still didn't retreat. He held his sword with both hands and slashed forward. At the same time, his sword domain suppressed Xian Yong's halberd once more. Bang! Within the sword domain, an enormous bang that shook the heavens resounded abruptly, and then Yi Xian's face instantly turned ghastly pale. However, he'd forcefully blocked this halberd strike. After that, he suddenly grabbed the halberd with his left hand, and then he swiftly stabbed forward with the sword in his right hand. However, Xian Yong's reaction was extremely swift. At the instant Yi Xian's sword stabbed forward, Xian Yong suddenly let go of the halberd, clenched his right hand into a fist, and then smashed his fist towards Yi Xian's sword. Rumble. Both of them retreated explosively at the same time. This caused Yi Xian to retreat by over 300 m, and the space he retreated to had collapsed and been obliterated. In the distance, Xian Yong had stopped as well, and then he suddenly tossed the halberd in his right hand towards Yi Xian. At the same time, he suddenly stomped his right foot backwards, and his entire body shot out explosively like a cannonball. Yi Xian had just stopped when a halberd tore through the sky towards him, and it was Xian Yong who was following behind it. A wisp of ferocity flashed through Yi Xian's eyes as he stabbed with his sword. This time, it was a strike to decide life and death with a single strike. It was a sword technique that the woman in a simple dress had taught him. A single strike of the sword to decide life and death. Actually, it was more appropriate to say that he could decide life and death with a single strike of the sword. Because he didn't possess the invincible strength that the woman in a simple dress possessed, so it was impossible for him to decide the life and death of anyone with a single strike of the sword. Once this strike of the sword was executed, only one of them would die. This was his current state of mind. A single strike. A sword howl resounded through the starry sky like a thunderclap. Bang! As soon as the halberd came into contact with Yi Xian's sword, both sword and halberd trembled violently, and then the halberd was blasted flying. This strike of the sword had destroyed the halberd. However, Xian Yong had already appeared in front of Yi Xian, and he smashed his fist towards Yi Xian's chest. His fist was extremely overbearing, and it wasn't the slightest bit weaker than the halberd. Dual cultivation of the fist and halberd. Yi Xian didn't dodge when facing Xian Yong's fist, and he allowed Xian Yong's fist to smash against his chest. However, he'd smashed his fist against Xian Yong's chest as well. Of course, this wasn't an ordinary punch, but a Taoist scripture martial technique, courting death. Their fists had just arrived before each other. Rumble. The mountains for tens of thousands of miles around them were suddenly razed to the ground, and the two of them were blasted back. They flew for tens of thousands of feet, and the entire sky and earth was a mess. After Yi Xian stopped, he spat out a mouthful of blood, and his body cracked inch by inch. Fortunately, he had the indestructible body of 10,000 Buddhas, so his body wasn't completely destroyed. However, it was still miserable, and his body was covered in cracks, revealing his white bones. In the distance, Xian Yong wasn't having a good time either. He'd taken the brunt of Yi Xian's attack. This chapter is not over, please turn the page. After using the Taoist scripture martial technique, he'd instantly retreated thousands of feet away. His battle robe had also turned to ash, and his body was covered in several cracks. His body was dyed red with blood, and he looked like a man made of blood. Both of them were in a miserable state. Xian Yong looked at the distant Yi Xian, and his expression was incomparably solemn. He hadn't expected that the human in front of him would fight him to this extent. It had to be known that Yi Xian was only at the self-release realm, and hadn't reached the Tao corroboration realm. In next to no time, he suddenly noticed a problem. It was that he'd suffered a great loss by trading injury for injury just now. Because he'd been suppressing Yi Xian earlier, and it was only just now that he'd chosen to trade injury for injury that caused both sides to be injured. The reason he'd chosen to trade injury for injury was because he didn't think that Yi Xian would be able to take a punch from him head-on. Of course, he hadn't expected that Yi Xian would possess such a formidable martial technique. Even though he'd resisted that martial technique just now, he'd been heavily injured. Xian Yong took a deep breath. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, "I've more or less recovered." Xian Yong looked at Yi Xian, and he was stunned when he saw Yi Xian. Because at this moment, Yi Xian's injuries had mostly recovered. Xian Yong stared fixedly at Yi Xian. How could this be possible? Yi Xian naturally hadn't told Xian Yong that his body possessed the ability to heal. A god seal suddenly appeared between his brows, and then he vanished on the spot in the next moment. A single strike to decide life and death. After he attained the Tao corroboration realm, the might of Yi Xian's attack had instantly risen explosively, and it was at least a few times stronger than before. A ferocious expression flashed through Xian Yong's eyes. He gestured with his right hand, and the halberd appeared in his grasp. In the next moment, he leaped up and stabbed with the halberd. Flames incinerated the sky on the halberd. Hiss! A sharp and ear-piercing sound of something being torn apart resounded abruptly. Bang! Suddenly, an expanse of flames and the glow of a sword erupted. In an instant, both of them retreated explosively. During this process, Yi Xian suddenly opened his palm, and then his sword flew forward and slashed through the surroundings. Xian Yong's reaction was extremely swift. At the instant that Yi Xian attacked, the halberd in his hand had suddenly flown forward, and it tore through the air and tore through everything. The halberd and sword collided once more. Bang! The glow of the sword and flames suddenly erupted. The entire heavens and the earth trembled. As soon as Yi Xian stopped moving, he opened his palm, and the soul-suppressing sword appeared in his grasp. He pointed it at Xian Yong from afar, soul suppression with a single strike. A sword howl suddenly shook the heavens and the earth, and then an extremely powerful strand of the soul suddenly locked onto Xian Yong. Meanwhile, Xian Yong suddenly roared furiously, "Disperse!" As soon as he finished speaking, a powerful sound wave swept out from within him, and it was accompanied by a powerful aura of evil and slaughter. Rumble. This energy had actually forcefully obstructed the energy of the soul-suppressing sword. Yi Xian's attack hadn't been able to successfully suppress Xian Yong's soul. Xian Yong had experienced countless battles, and his soul was extraordinarily strong. So, unless the soul-suppressing sword was stabbed into his body, otherwise, it was practically impossible to suppress his soul from afar. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. A strand of sword light tore through the battlefield. The 3 sword lights contained 3 powerful domains. A single strike to decide life and death plus 3 domains. Yi Xian's strongest attack. A wisp of a ferocious smile arose on the corners of Xian Yong's mouth. He suddenly stomped his right foot on the ground, and space collapsed while his figure shot forward explosively. A strand of flames instantly swept through the sky from the halberd in his hand, and it was like heavenly flames could destroy the world. A halberd of life and death. Only one of them would die beneath this halberd strike. Doubting divine generals had never been afraid of death. P.S. It's a new month. Vote if you have a ticket. End of this chapter. Chapter 1334. In the sky, both Yi Xian and Divine General Xian Yong executed their strongest attacks. It didn't take long for Yi Xian's sword to collide with Divine General Xian Yong's halberd. In an instant, bang! In an instant, the space in a radius of hundreds of thousands of kilometers was reduced to ashes. Countless rays of sword light and flaming halberd energy shot out from the pitch-black space, and it was a complete mess. As for Yi Xian and Xian Yong, they both retreated explosively for tens of thousands of meters. After Yi Xian stopped, his body slowly fell from the sky while blood gushed out incessantly from his mouth. His injuries were extremely severe, and his entire body was covered in cracks. He was like porcelain that had suffered a heavy blow and would shatter at any moment. At this moment, he couldn't feel his own body anymore. In the distance, Xian Yong was also slowly falling from the sky. His injuries were extremely severe as well, and his body was covered in dense sword energy. Especially his right hand, it had almost been chopped off by Yi Xian's sword. However, the halberd by his side still emitted a powerful halberd intent. The halberd's soul was inextinguishable, and its battle intent surged. Suddenly, the halberd transformed into a black ray of light that shot out and slashed towards Yi Xian in the distance. An autonomous attack. Meanwhile, a sword suddenly flew out from within Yi Xian's body. It was the soul-suppressing sword. The soul-suppressing sword transformed into a black ray of sword light that slashed towards the halberd. It didn't take long for the sword and halberd to fight in midair. Meanwhile, Yi Xian and Xian Yong had already landed on the ground. Bang! Yi Xian's body trembled slightly, and he spat out another mouthful of blood. He took a deep breath, placed his hands on the ground, and slowly exerted force in an attempt to stand up. However, he realized that it was extremely difficult. Because he could barely feel his own body anymore. But he knew that he had to stand up. Yi Xian took another deep breath, roared furiously, and suddenly exerted force with his right hand. Crack! The sound of bones breaking suddenly resounded from this exertion. His right hand was directly fractured. Because his entire body had been smashed into pieces just now, that was why a light exertion of force was able to fracture his arm. Although his arm was fractured, he still stood up. In the distance, Xian Yong had also stood up and was slowly walking towards him. Yi Xian grinned and then slowly walked towards Xian Yong. Both of them walked very slowly, but the desire to fight in their eyes was unprecedentedly strong. Meanwhile, Yi Xian's sword and Xian Yong's halberd were still locked in a fierce battle in the sky. The battle between the halberd and sword was like a raging fire, incomparably intense. In the 5-dimensional universe. In the starry sky, Moon Yanyan suddenly laughed and said, as expected of the doubting immortal general. You have been through hundreds of battles. Even though your body is broken, your will is still strong. In your eyes, there is only battle and death. Bai Dizzy smiled faintly. I have to say, this young Master Yi has shocked this old one. At such a young age, you're not only powerful, but you're also as ferocious as a doubting divine general. If he joins my doubting, I'm afraid he'll be able to threaten the white-robed divine general's position in the future. Moon Yinyan looked at Bai Dizzy and said with a smile, White-robed divine general. Bai Dizzy said with a smile, I am the strongest divine general of doubting. I have fought in the Dao tomb all my life and have only lost once. At this point, he looked at Moon Yinyan. After learning that you killed Heng Tianwu in the underworld, he wanted to meet you. Unfortunately, he has a mission to guard the heaven abyss. What a pity. Moon Yinyan laughed. Bai Dizzy was a little curious. What are you laughing at, miss? Moon Yinyan said with a smile, my little brother has a sister called Qing'er. At this point, she suddenly became excited. In that case, it seems like she's going to call me sister. At this point, she seemed to have thought of something and quickly shook her head. No, this woman is unreasonable. I can't take advantage of her, or I'll be beaten. At this time, Bai Dizzy suddenly said, Qing'er? Is she the woman in a plain dress behind Yi Xian? Moon Yinyan looked at Bai Dizzy and said with a smile, it seems like you've investigated very clearly. You even investigated her. Bai Dizzy shook his head and smiled, we've always been very serious when facing our enemies. Moon Yinyan said with a smile, as expected of a force that could exist for so long. By the way, how much do you know about this Qing'er? Bai Dizzy shook his head, I only know that she only uses one sword to kill. Moon Yinyan blinked, what else? Bai Dizzy looked at Moon Yinyan and said with a smile, what do you want to say, miss? Moon Yinyan said with a straight face, she's very powerful, really. Most importantly, this woman's way of thinking is very dangerous, as if she wants to destroy the universe at the slightest provocation. It's really a little scary. Bai Dizzy said with a smile, miss, she only needs one sword to kill in this lower realm. It's not difficult to say anything. Moon Yinyan was a little curious, why do you say that? Bai Dizzy said with a smile, maybe it's not that she's too strong, but that the people of this world are too weak? Moon Yinyan blinked, then laughed, actually, what you said makes a lot of sense. Bai Dizzy looked at Moon Yinyan and didn't say anything. Moon Yinyan also didn't say anything. She turned her head and looked in the distance. Yi Xian and Divine General Xian Yong were only about 10 zhang apart. Yi Xian didn't say anything, his left hand slowly clenched, but at this time, he couldn't mobilize any strength, and opposite him, Xian Yong was the same. At this time, Yi Xian and Xian Yong suddenly charged at each other. Both of them seemed like they were fighting one last attack before death. Xian Yong's fist smashed against Yi Xian's chest, and Yi Xian's fist smashed against Xian Yong's chest as well. Bang! Bang! Both of them were instantly blasted flying, and then they smashed heavily against the ground. This time, their bodies twitched while blood sprayed. Their injuries were very, very serious. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly roared furiously, and then he forced himself to stand up. He opened his palm, and a sword appeared in it. Executing Heaven Sword. Yi Xian looked at Xian Yong and grinned, I have 2 swords. As soon as he finished speaking, the Executing Heaven Sword in his hands suddenly flew out. However, it wasn't able to kill Xian Yong because a beast soul had suddenly appeared in front of Xian Yong, and the beast soul suddenly roared furiously and forcefully blocked the Executing Heaven Sword. Meanwhile, another sword appeared in Yi Xian's hand. The Sword Spirit. Xian Yong's expression instantly changed when he saw the Sword Spirit. But right at this moment, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared on the scene. The middle-aged man wore black armor and held a long saber in his hand. His gaze descended onto Yi Xian, and in the next moment, he raised his saber and charged towards Yi Xian. In the 5th dimension. Moon Yinyan smiled silently and didn't say anything. Bai Dizzy wasn't too far away from her as he gazed into the distance, and no one knew what he was thinking. Right when the middle-aged man arrived in front of Yi Xian, Xian Yong suddenly said, Stop. The middle-aged man stopped and gazed at Xian Yong. Xian Yong slowly closed his eyes. I'm fighting him fairly. Why are you interfering? The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment before he said, Divine General, the objective of our trip is... Shut up. Xian Yong suddenly gazed at the middle-aged man. Stand down. The middle-aged man didn't dare refute him and immediately retreated to the side. Xian Yong looked at Yi Xian. You have a swordsman woman in your body. Why didn't you let her out just now? Yi Xian smiled and said, You and I are having a fair battle. Why would you want an outsider to interfere? Xian Yong looked deeply at Yi Xian. What a fair fight. Although you are my opponent, you are still an upright person. Next time, we will fight to the death. Finish then, he turned around and left. The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment, wanting to say something but hesitating. In the distance, Xian Yong suddenly said, I'll take full responsibility. The middle-aged man sighed softly, then turned around and left. He could actually sense Yi Xian's weakness. It could be said that he could kill Yi Xian effortlessly now. However, he did not dare to reject Xian Yong's order. After Xian Yong left, Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. It had to be said that Divine General Xian Yong was indeed very strong, be it in terms of battle awareness or ruthlessness. This time, if his physical body was not strong enough, he would definitely not be able to defeat the other party. This was because the other party was a fist and halberd cultivator. Moreover, if the soul-suppressing sword was not strong enough, it would not work because the halberd in Xian Yong's hand was at least at the Dao-confirming realm. The battle just now was not only a battle between him and Xian Yong, but also the soul-suppressing sword and that long sword. Of course, he still had a trump card that he had not taken out, and that was the Jianghu gourd and the power of his bloodline. However, he was also very clear that if he had a trump card, others would definitely have a trump card too. The other party was experienced in hundreds of battles, so it was impossible that he did not have a trump card. Yi Xian withdrew his thoughts and looked at senior sister Lu. Let's go back. With that, he turned around and was about to leave, but he suddenly realized that his injuries were very serious. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled bitterly. Then, he sat down cross-legged and began to heal. In the five-dimensional universe. Bai Dizzy looked at Mu Ninian. This lady is very confident in young Master Yi. From the beginning until now, he realized that the woman in front of him had not shown any signs of making a move. There was only one explanation, and that was that she had confidence in Yi Xian. Mu Ninian smiled. Your divine general has the demeanor of an expert. If he meets me next time, I promise to leave his corpse intact. With that, she turned around and left. In the field, Bai Dizzy was silent. This time, he had originally wanted to force Mu Ninian to make a move, but he had not expected that Yi Xian would be evenly matched with Divine General Xian Yong. And that Yi Xian was only in his early 20s. Not only was he young, but his strength was also so heaven-defying. Most importantly, he had a ruthless spirit in his bones. Bai Dizzy was silent for a long time before he turned around and left. At this moment, he had already made up his mind. This Yi Xian could not be allowed to live, especially not to allow Yi Xian to rely on the Dao tomb. Yi Xian must die. It could be said that this was a doubting attitude. Yi Xian, who was recuperating, suddenly raised his head. He did not know when Mu Ninian had appeared in front of him. Seeing Mu Ninian, Yi Xian immediately breathed a sigh of relief. Sister Nian, has doubting already made a move? Mu Ninian smiled. Yes. Yi Xian was about to speak when Mu Ninian said, focus on recuperating. Yi Xian nodded. 4 hours later, Yi Xian's injuries were 80 to 90% healed. Beside him, Mu Ninian smiled. How did that battle feel? Yi Xian said with a smile, that felt great. Mu Ninian looked at Yi Xian. Doubting has someone dozens of times stronger than the one just now. Yi Xian was speechless. Mu Ninian smiled. Scared? Yi Xian nodded. A little. Mu Niannian laughed. She lightly patted Yi Xian's shoulder. Useless. A real man lives in this world with his head holding up the sky and his feet stepping on the ground fearlessly. You're actually afraid. Useless. Yi Xian suddenly asked, Sister Nian, are you afraid of Qing? Mu Niannian's expression froze. After a moment, she looked up at the sky. Tonight's moon is not bad. The wind is gentle. My hands are a little itchy. Yi Xian was speechless. Chapter 1335. Looking at the wounded Yi Xian, Mu Niannian didn't do it. She just rolled her eyes at Yi Xian. Yi Xian chuckled. Sister Nian, actually, Qing is a good person. Mu Niannian shook her head. Idiot, that's for you. Then, she smiled. The scariest thing about her is her indifference to life. In her eyes, there's only the difference between the living and the dead. Yi Xian was silent. Indeed, Qing was sometimes too cold. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian asked, Sister Nian, how bad is Qing? Mu Niannian was silent. Yi Xian asked, even you don't know? Mu Niannian chuckled and said, I can roughly guess, but I can't tell you. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why? Mu Niannian blinked. Because I don't want to hurt you. Yi Xian was speechless. Mu Niannian smiled. Come, follow me. It's time for you to understand something. Then, she turned and left. Yi Xian hurried to follow her. In the underworld. Bai Dizzy appeared at the intersection of the underworld and the living world. As soon as he appeared, Mu Sheng appeared in front of him. Bai Dizzy smiled. Miss Mu Sheng, are you willing to go doubting with us? Mu Sheng narrowed her eyes. Bai Di Xing, do you know my duty? Bai Dizzy nodded. I do. Miss Mu Sheng has guarded this world for so many years. You've done a great service. Mu Sheng said in a low voice. You don't want the boundary between the underworld and the living world. Bai Dizzy nodded. Mu Sheng was silent for a moment. Bai Di Xing, I can leave this place. But I don't want to go doubting for now. I want to look around. White Emperor Star Lord fell silent. Mu Sheng continued, White Emperor Star Sovereign, I don't have any other intentions. I just want to look around, that's all. Bai Dizzy glanced at Mu Sheng and said softly, the door of doubting will always be open for you. As soon as he finished speaking, he opened his palm, and there was a thick ancient book in his hand. He flipped it open and found Mu Sheng's name. After that, he swiped it lightly, and Mu Sheng's name vanished from the book. In an instant, something seemed to disappear from Mu Sheng's body. Bai Dizzy looked at Mu Sheng and said, I have now removed Miss from the priesthood. Miss is now free. Miss can go anywhere in this vast world. However, the doubting does not want Miss to become the doubting's enemy in the future. Mu Sheng took a deep breath and said, Don't worry, White Emperor Starlord. Even if I don't return to the doubting, I won't become an enemy of the doubting. I'm the protector of the Grand Tao, and that will never change. Bai Dizzy nodded, Miss, take care. With that, he turned around and left. In the same place, Mu Sheng looked around with a complicated expression. At this time, Man Zhu and Sha Hua appeared beside her. Man Zhu said softly, You can go to the doubting. Mu Sheng was expressionless. The doubting is no longer the doubting of the past. The 3,000 Grand Taos have become the tools of some people. Man Zhu was silent. Mu Sheng looked at Man Zhu and Sha Hua and said, Let's go. Man Zhu and Sha Hua nodded, and soon, the three women disappeared. With Mu Sheng's departure, there were no longer any obstacles between the Yin realm and the Yang realm. They could go from the Yin realm to the Yang realm at any time. Bai Dizzy arrived at the Yin realm's lotus platform. On the lotus platform was Nanzang Bodhisattva. Bai Dizzy smiled, Nanzang Bodhisattva, how have you been? Nanzang put his palms together. White Emperor Star-Lord, did you come for the fifth dimension? Bai the Emperor nodded. Nanzang, the doubting needs your help. Nanzang shook his head and smiled. White Emperor Star-Lord must be joking. Bai Dizzy said softly, the majority of my doubting experts are guarding the celestial abyss. Nanzang was silent. Bai Dizzy smiled. I won't help for nothing. Nanzang looked at Bai Dizzy. Does Star-Lord know the strength of that girl? Bai Dizzy said softly, this is no longer important. Nanzang frowned. What does this flower mean? Bai Dizzy looked at Nanzang. She is provoking the might of the doubting. Provoking. Nanzang was silent. At this moment, he understood. The relationship between the doubting and Yi Xian could not be resolved peacefully. Yi Xian had the Tao scripture that the doubting wanted. Moreover, Yi Xian had killed the sixth princess of the doubting. With this, the doubting would not be able to resolve peacefully with Yi Xian. As for Mu Niannian, this woman was already provoking the doubting. The doubting would not allow anyone to provoke their might. Nanzang was still silent. He had seen Mu Niannian and knew how powerful that woman was. He did not want to face that woman. As if knowing what Nanzang was thinking, Bai Dizzy suddenly said, don't worry, someone will fight her. We need Nanzang Bodhisattva to help us with something else. Nanzang suddenly shook his head. White Emperor Star-Lord, go find someone else. I am already an outsider and do not want to interfere in worldly matters. White Emperor Star-Lord smiled. Bright mirror. Hearing this, Nanzang's expression changed. Bright mirror? Bright mirror was a Buddhist treasure. White Emperor Star-Lord nodded. Nanzang was silent. A moment later, White Emperor Star-Lord left the Lotus platform and arrived at an entrance to an underground place. Entrance to Hell. There were a total of 18 levels under this entrance. White Emperor Star-Lord arrived at the entrance to the 18th level, but he did not enter. Looking in front of him, he softly said, Your Excellency, scram. All of a sudden, an angry roar came from inside. For a moment, the entire underworld was shaken, and the 18 levels of hell were wailing like ghosts and howling like wolves. After a moment of silence, White Emperor Star-Lord shook his head. What a pitiful person. After saying this, he turned around and left. After coming out, White Emperor Star-Lord saw the Lord of Underworld. The Lord of Underworld said calmly, as I said, it is useless. White Emperor Star-Lord nodded. Fine, if he likes to imprison himself, let him imprison himself. The Lord of Underworld asked, what do you plan to do next? White Emperor Star-Lord said softly, to deal with that woman, we must deal with the fifth dimension. Now that the underworld and the yang world are connected, we can make the fifth dimension tribulation of the fifth dimension arrive in advance. If that woman wants to protect the fifth dimension, she must fight against the fifth dimension tribulation. At that time, she will be at her weakest. After a moment of silence, the Lord of Underworld asked, how do we make the fifth dimension tribulation of the fifth dimension arrive in advance? White Emperor Star-Lord said softly, destroy the origin of the fifth dimension. The Lord of Underworld said in a deep voice, who will deal with that woman? In fact, the fifth dimension was not scary, and neither was Yi Xian. Yi Xian's threat was in the future, while that woman's threat was in the present. As long as they could deal with Mu Niannian, the fifth dimension could be destroyed with a flick of their fingers. White Emperor Star-Lord said with a smile, Lord of Underworld, rest assured. That woman will naturally be dealt with by me, doubting. The Lord of Underworld nodded, good. White Emperor Star-Lord turned to look at the depths of the starry sky and said softly, they should be here soon. Mu Niannian brought Yi Xian to a lake. The lake was in the shape of a heart, and the water was clear. At a glance, one could see the blue sky and white clouds. Yi Xian looked at Mu Niannian, and Mu Niannian said with a smile, Heavenly Heart Lake. I gave it that name. Yi Xian hurriedly said, it's a good name. It sounds good. Mu Niannian glanced at Yi Xian and said, slippery fellow. She pulled Yi Xian's hand and walked towards the lake. Soon, the two of them reached the bottom of the lake. There were no living creatures at the bottom of the lake, but when they reached the deepest part of the lake, a wave of hot air surged over. This wave of hot air caused Yi Xian's expression to change. This was because he was not used to the temperature. One had to know that his current physical body was extremely powerful. Mu Niannian continued to pull Yi Xian down. Soon, the two of them arrived in front of a barrier. The barrier was 100 zhang wide, and behind it was surging magma. Yi Xian looked at Mu Niannian and said, "Sister Nian, this is?" Mu Niannian smiled and said, "This is the fifth dimension tribulation." Fifth dimension tribulation. Yi Xian was stunned. Mu Niannian chuckled and said, "Actually, there are many hidden dangers in this universe, but I've suppressed them. Just like the scene in front of you, I've used my power to suppress the magma. It's not just a little bit of magma, it's the entire underground magma. Once the magma comes out, the power of the magma that has accumulated for tens of thousands of years will destroy everything. Not only that, there are many hidden dangers in this universe. Simply put, it's very dangerous." Yi Xian was silent. Mu Niannian smiled and said, "The reason I brought you here is to tell you that the danger of the fifth dimension is not limited to the outside world. The fifth dimension itself is very dangerous. The entire fifth dimension is full of dangers, and these dangers are not something you can solve with strength alone. Take me for example. Although I can suppress them for a while, the more I suppress them, the more terrifying they will become in the future. Suppressing them is not a long-term solution. Do you understand what I mean?" Yi Xian nodded. "I understand. We must change the fifth dimension." Mu Niannian nodded. "We must change it. Originally, I thought we would have time to slowly change everything, but now it seems we don't have that much time." Saying this, she raised her head and looked at the horizon. She smiled and said, "Really, not even a bit of time is given." After saying this, she brought Yi Xian away from the depths of the underground and arrived at the lakeside. Yi Xian raised his head and looked at the horizon. He saw an old man. It was Bai Dizzy. Bai Dizzy looked at Mu Niannian and faintly smiled. "We meet again." Mu Niannian smiled. "You really don't give people a chance to breathe." Bai Dizzy shook his head. "Miss, if you are willing to pledge allegiance to the Tao Ting, we can immediately retreat and never harm the fifth dimension. Not only that, the Tao Ting can take any position other than the Tao Ting ancestor." It had to be said that this condition was very tempting. Mu Niannian smiled. "First make me surrender, then control the fifth dimension, and finally control me. This is your real plan, isn't it?" Bai Dizzy looked at Mu Niannian and didn't say anything. Mu Niannian faintly smiled. "I think you must have prepared a big gift for me." "Come." Bai Dizzy softly said, "Then I will have to offend you." After saying this, he turned around and waved his right hand. "Battle path, appear." As the sound of his voice faded, a golden light suddenly appeared in the entire sky. Within the golden light was a golden path that was hundreds of feet wide. Within the golden path, a nine-headed rock suddenly flew out. On the head of the nine-headed rock stood a man holding a halberd. At this time, Bai Dizzy spread out his right hand and lightly waved it in all directions. In an instant, a golden light covered a radius of tens of thousands of miles. Bai Dizzy faintly smiled. "Battle path, I will not rest until I die. Miss, are you ready? P.S. Give me a ticket." Chapter 1336. Battle Dao. The so-called Battle Dao referred to the Dao of war. This was a kind of attitude towards Dao Ting. Dao Ting had only been used on the Dao tomb. Because Battle Dao was connected to Dao Ting experts could come over at any time. But now, Dao Ting was being used on Mu Niannian. Clearly, they wanted to kill Mu Niannian this time. Below, Mu Niannian smiled. Her smile was very calm. "Won't stop until one of us dies?" Bai Dizzy looked at Mu Niannian. "Yes." Mu Niannian laughed heartily, "Then come." Bai Dizzy quietly retreated. In the sky, on the Battle Dao, the man riding the nine-headed rock suddenly swooped down from the sky. Boom! This dive was like several towering mountains crashing down, and a pressure that could destroy the heavens and annihilate the earth swept through the entire land. At this moment, the entire world trembled. It was as if doomsday had arrived. Mu Nianyan's eyes gradually turned cold. This man's target was not only her, but also the origin of the five-dimensional universe. If this man landed, the origin of this universe would definitely be heavily damaged. Yi Xian looked at the man swooping down from the sky with a trace of worry in his eyes. This man was much stronger than Divine General Xian Yong. Most importantly, the nine-headed rocks were not any weaker than this man. The power of the nine-headed rocks combined with the man's strength could truly be described as world-destroying. At this moment, Mu Nianyan suddenly looked at Yi Xian and smiled. "Do you still remember something I said to you before?" Yi Xian asked. "What?" Mu Nianyan rolled her eyes at Yi Xian. "If you don't remember, then forget it." With that, she lightly stamped her right foot and soared into the sky. In the same place, Yi Xian was dumbfounded. In the sky, Mu Nianyan's petite figure seemed exceptionally tiny compared to the nine-headed rocks and the man. However, the nine-headed rocks and the man had extremely serious expressions on their faces. How could they dare to underestimate the woman in front of them? This was an existence that had insta-killed a divine general. The man gripped the heavenly halberd tightly in his right hand. He stared at the calm Mu Nianyan below. Doubting Vanguard General Ren Tianqing. "Please advise me, miss." As soon as he finished speaking, the nine rock beneath him suddenly raised its head and let out a furious howl, and then its speed increased explosively by a few times. At this moment, it was as if the world was about to collapse. At the same time, an extremely terrifying pressure directly enveloped Mu Nianyan below. Under this pressure, Mu Nianyan was like a small boat in a raging storm, appearing extremely frail. Right at this moment, Mu Nianyan suddenly vanished on the spot. In the next moment, the pressure in the sky vanished without a trace, and then Mu Nianyan had suddenly appeared in front of Ren Tianqing. Ren Tianqing's pupils constricted, and he instinctively swung his halberd. However, Mu Nianyan's fist suddenly smashed against his throat. Crack! The sound of bones breaking resounded, and then Ren Tianqing's head instantly flew into the air. Meanwhile, Mu Nianyan suddenly descended onto the back of the nine-headed rocks, and then she lightly stomped her right foot on the ground. Bang! The nine-headed rocks suddenly exploded apart, and blood instantly dyed the entire sky red. At this moment, everyone was stunned, including Yi Xian. Another instant kill. Yi Xian stared fixedly at Mu Nianyan. Exactly how strong is Big Sister Nian? Bai Dizzy was gazing at Mu Nianyan as well, and there was a trace of seriousness in his eyes. Another instant kill. Actually, he knew that Ren Tianqing couldn't defeat Mu Nianyan, and the reason he'd asked Ren Tianqing to fight was because he wanted to see exactly how strong Mu Nianyan was. Unfortunately, he'd still been disappointed. Mu Nianyan had instantly killed Ren Tianqing. Since it was an instant kill, then he naturally didn't know Mu Nianyan's approximate strength. Bai Dizzy remained silent, and no one knew what he was thinking. In the sky, Mu Nianyan waved her hand lightly, and then the blood in the sky instantly vanished without a trace. After that, she gazed at Bai Dizzy and smiled. Next. Her voice was calm, but it carried a strand of domineering aura. Bai Dizzy gazed at Mu Nianyan and spoke softly. "I underestimated you, young miss." Mu Nianyan shook her head and smiled. "All of you've never taken me seriously." As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian below. Sister Nian has lived for so many years, and she understands one principle. You must always maintain a low-key and humble heart. As a person, you can't be complacent, and you can't think that you're above everyone else. You must know that there's always someone better out there. Yi Xian was silent. Low-key and humble. Sister Nian had said this principle more than once. In fact, it might be related to Qing Air. In the fifth dimension, before she'd met Qing Air, Sister Nian should be invincible. And when she'd met Qing Air, it was probably her low-key and humble attitude that saved her. After all, Qing wasn't a kind person. Being arrogant in front of Qing, that would mean that she was really tired of living. Of course, Yi Xian knew that Sister Nian had said this not only for him to hear, but also for the Doubting to hear. The Doubting had been arrogant from the start, and he'd even tried to recruit Sister Nian. From the Doubting's point of view, they'd recruited Sister Nian because they valued her. But from Sister Nian's point of view, the Doubting's recruitment was looking down on her. Yi Xian glanced at Sister Nian. At this moment, he was suddenly in a daze. Just how strong was Sister Nian? He really didn't have any confidence. In the sky, Bai Dizzy looked at Mu Nian and spoke softly, "Young miss, what you said just now is very reasonable. But do you really understand this principle?" Mu Nian smiled. "You want to say that I've underestimated the Doubting, right?" Bai Dizzy smiled. "You think that we've underestimated you, but we also think that you've underestimated us." Mu Nian laughed heartily. "What you said actually makes sense. Since that's the case, let's continue fighting. As for who underestimated who, we'll only know after we fight." As she spoke, she glanced at the Doubting and smiled. "Why don't I go to the Doubting and fight?" "Go to the Doubting?" Bai Dizzy narrowed her eyes and slowly clenched her right hand. Below, Yi Xian's eyelids twitched. Was Sister Nian playing with her life? At this moment, Bai Dizzy suddenly smiled. "Young miss, you don't want the battle to take place in the fifth dimension." Mu Nian blinked. "You can say that." Bai Dizzy shook her head. "I'm sorry, I'm afraid it won't go as you wish." Mu Nian looked at Bai Dizzy and did not speak. At this moment, Guan Yin suddenly appeared beside Yi Xian and said in a deep voice, "I've just received news that countless Yin Qi has suddenly appeared in the fifth dimension. This Yin Qi is corroding the ecological environment of the entire fifth dimension. In addition, the spiritual Qi of our fifth dimension is flowing away at an alarming speed for some unknown reason." Hearing this, Yi Xian raised his head and looked at Bai Dizzy. "You're targeting the fifth dimension." Bai Dizzy smiled, then looked at Mu Nian. "Young miss, at this speed, the fifth dimension tribulation of the fifth dimension will arrive in advance." Mu Nian smiled. "I've really underestimated you. How dare you let the Tao realm guarding the Yin world and the Yang world leave? How are your actions any different from those of the Tao breakers?" Bai Dizzy looked at Mu Nian. "Anything can be changed." Mu Nian laughed. "No wonder the 3,000 great Taos collapsed. The real reason is not the Tao breakers, but you, the Tao guardians. The 3,000 great Taos guarding the world is an excellent thing in itself, but you Tao guardians abuse it. If the spirit of the great Tao is still here, I'm afraid you'll be angered to death." Bai Dizzy stared at Mu Nian. "You actually know about the spirit of the great Tao?" Mu Nian suddenly turned to look at Yi Xian. "Remember, the spirit of the great Tao is the boss of the 3,000 great Taos. If you gather all 9 Tao scriptures, you can summon the spirit of the great Tao. At that time, these Tao guardians will be your little brothers, understand?" Yi Xian nodded. "I'll try my best." In the distance, Bai Dizzy smiled. "He won't have this chance. Because today, you siblings and this universe will disappear from this world." As his voice faded, he turned to look at the depths of the starry sky. "Activate." As soon as Bai Dizzy's voice faded, in the depths of the distant starry sky, a white light suddenly appeared. The next moment, the white light covered the entire starry sky, and then, countless strange runes suddenly appeared in the white light. With the appearance of this huge formation, the temperature of the entire fifth dimension suddenly soared. Not only that, but the spiritual energy of the entire fifth dimension was also disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye. This kind of disappearing could be felt personally. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian's expression suddenly changed. In the sky, as Mu Nian looked at the formation, she slowly clenched her right hand. At this moment, on the battle path, a burly man suddenly appeared. The man was tens of feet tall, and he held a giant axe in his hand. When he appeared on the battle path, the entire world suddenly trembled, as if it could not bear his power. The man looked down at Mu Nian below and smiled coldly. I am the doubting giant Ling Tian god. Mortal, the doubting ancestor has the virtue of cherishing life, and I advise you to surrender. You should immediately kneel down and kowtow to thank the heavens. However, you ate a bear's heart and a leopard's heart, and actually dared to resist my doubting. You. At this moment, Moon Yin suddenly disappeared, and the next moment, the giant Ling Tian god's expression became ferocious. How dare you attack in front of this god? After saying that, he chopped down with his axe. This chop directly split the heavens and the earth. The power of this axe could really destroy this world. And the opponent's goal was also very obvious, to severely damage this world. Right at this moment, Moon Yin's fist suddenly landed on the gigantic axe. Boom! Under everyone's gaze, the giant axe suddenly exploded, and Moon Yin arrived in front of the giant Ling Tian god. She punched the giant Ling Tian god's head. Bang! The giant Ling Tian god's head directly exploded. His soul was completely destroyed. Moon Yin clapped her hands. What kind of rubbish is this? Kowtow to thank the heavens? It's fine if you're used to kneeling, but you want me to kneel like you? As she said that, she looked at the formation in the depths of the starry sky, and in front of that formation, 28 super experts had appeared out of nowhere. Moon Yin squinted her eyes, the 28 lunar mansions of the legends. In the distance, Bai Dizzy looked at Moon Yin. Your Excellency, even if you have the power to kill the 28 lunar mansions, you still can't prevent the fifth dimension calamity from coming today, because every time you attack, it consumes a lot of energy in this universe. Am I right? Moon Yin was silent. Bai Dizzy faintly smiled. Look around. Yi Xian looked around. With this glance, he could see very far away. At this moment, the fifth dimension calamity actually caused mountains to collapse, spiritual energy to disappear, and most importantly, mysterious heavenly lightning. Fifth dimension calamity. The entire fifth dimension universe was rapidly dying. Yi Xian's complexion sank. At this time, Moon Yin suddenly smiled. Why should I prevent the fifth dimension calamity from coming? Hearing this, Bai Dizzy's pupils suddenly shrank, and a sense of uneasiness rose in her heart. Moon Yin looked around and softly said, I have suppressed it for so long, and in fact, I have reached my limit. There is not much difference between coming now and coming a few years later. As she said that, she suddenly coughed violently. Not only that, but her complexion had also become pale, and there was even a trace of blood at the corner of her mouth. Seeing this, Bai Dizzy was startled, and then he laughed. He had guessed correctly. Destroying the fifth dimension universe was equivalent to destroying Moon Yin. Because everything about Moon Yin originated from the fifth dimension universe. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly appeared next to Moon Yin. He grabbed Moon Yin's hand tightly. Sister, you rest a bit, I will handle the rest. Moon Yin shook her head. They came prepared. You are not them. Yi Xian suddenly roared angrily. Rest. Moon Yin looked at Yi Xian and saw that Yi Xian's eyes were red and glistening with tears. Yi Xian said with a trembling voice, Sister, can you believe in me? I will handle the rest. I will protect this universe. I can do it. You should rest well. Looking at Yi Xian's red eyes, Moon Yin's heart inexplicably softened. She gently wiped away the tears on Yi Xian's cheeks and softly smiled. Fool, you don't owe this universe anything. I suddenly regret letting you bear this responsibility. Will you blame me? Yi Xian hurriedly shook his head. No, it is only right and proper for me to help sister. Moon Yin roared with laughter, and then she pointed at the battle in the sky. Idiot, you should know that the Dao court won't let the matter rest today. Yi Xian held Moon Yin's hand tightly with both hands. I am not confident of winning, not at all. Moon Yin looked at Yi Xian. Then let me rest. Yi Xian grinned. I just think, if we are going to die today, I want to die before you. Moon Yin's body stiffened, her hand unconsciously holding Yi Xian's hand tightly, and she forced a smile on her face. Why? Yi Xian looked at Moon Yin and grinned. If I die first, I won't feel heartache. Also, I will definitely die in Sister Nian's arms, right? Moon Yin looked at Yi Xian for a long time. then shook her head. You are so cruel. Saying that, she gently wiped away the tears on Yi Xian's face and softly smiled. If one day you are bullied, there will only be one reason, and that is because I am not here. And if one day you die, there will only be one reason, and that is because I am dead. Chapter 1337. By the lake, Yi Xian tightly held Mu Nianyan's hand and said with a smile, none of us will die. Mu Nianyan smiled but did not say anything. In the five-dimensional universe. At this time, the spiritual energy in the five-dimensional universe was gradually collapsing and natural disasters were unceasing. The earth split open and thick smoke rose. In the depths of the sea, volcanoes erupted and a large amount of magma gushed out. The magma covered the sea and then spread to the land. In the sky, lightning flashed and continuously trampled the earth. In this part of the universe, countless people were screaming in despair. Fifth dimension calamity. This was both a natural disaster and a man-made disaster. By the lake, Yi Xian tightly held Mu Nianyan's hand. Mu Nianyan's face was becoming increasingly pale. Clearly, the appearance of the fifth dimension calamity had a great impact on her. In the horizon, Bai Dizzy did not attack again. He was no longer in a hurry. Because the longer he delayed, the more advantageous it would be for him. This woman's strength was too heaven-defying. He needed to borrow the power of the five-dimensional universe to weaken Mu Nianyan. Otherwise, if he forcefully attacked, Doubting would suffer disastrous losses. Fortunately, this woman had a weakness. By the lake, Yi Xian looked at Mu Nianyan and said with a smile, Sister, let me go first. You take a rest. Mu Nianyan looked at Yi Xian and faintly smiled. However, this smile seemed abnormally pale. Okay. Yi Xian turned around and looked at the horizon. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, Today, the fifth dimension calamity has arrived. It is both a natural disaster and a man-made disaster. I, Yi Xian, am willing to protect this part of the universe with my life. Is there anyone with me? His voice was like thunder as it slowly spread throughout the universe. At this moment, countless experts in the five-dimensional universe heard Yi Xian's voice. Countless people raised their heads to look at the source of the voice. By the lake, Yi Xian quietly stood there. He was not sure how many people would come. Because it was easy to share wealth, but it was also easy to go through trials and tribulations together. Even husband and wife would fly away in the face of disaster. Not to mention that he not only had to face the fifth dimension calamity, but he also had to face the man-made disaster of Doubting. How many people would come? Yi Xian was also at a loss. At this time, two women suddenly appeared beside Yi Xian. An Lanxiu and Lian Wanli. The two girls glanced at Yi Xian and didn't say anything. Yi Xian didn't say anything. Suddenly, a ray of sword light resounded in the sky. In the next moment, a woman appeared in the sky. It was Arrow. Arrow stood proudly with his sword in hand. As soon as Arrow arrived, there was another flash of sword light. Then, a woman appeared in the sky. Jiao. Jiao held a sword in her right hand and a wine gourd in her left. She reeked of wine. Beside Jiao was a woman with a saber at her waist. It was Situ. In the sky, Bai Dizzy glanced at Arrow and the others and smiled, not bad, but is that all? Me too. Meanwhile, a voice suddenly resounded from the sky, and then a woman appeared above the clouds in the sky. 3 lives. Seeing 3 lives, Bai Dizzy said softly, Dao Shi. 3 lives glanced at Bai Dizzy, Doubting are all beasts. Bai Dizzy frowned slightly, Dao Shi, you used to be one of us, but now, 3 lives suddenly said angrily, Tui. Old dog Bai Di, tell me, is the current Doubting still the Doubting of the past? Bai Dizzy shook his head, there are many problems with the current Doubting, but one day, Doubting will rebuild the order of the world and let the world return to how it was before. No, it will be better than before. 3 lives sneered, just because you people are blinded by greed. Bai Dizzy shook his head and smiled, then looked at Yi Xian. Is there anyone else? Yi Xian was silent. Up until now, only those close to him had come. As for the super experts he had nurtured, not a single one of them had come. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Was it true that they could only share riches and not trials and tribulations? Right at this moment, numerous formidable auras suddenly appeared in the distant sky. In the next moment, numerous afterimages flashed over from the horizon. Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes and looked at the horizon. More than 100 people had appeared. Among them, there were 26 true self-release realm experts, while the rest were only at the self-release realm. Almost all the self-release realm experts of the fifth dimension had come. At this moment, Jianghu, who was in the lead, smiled, not as fast as Lady Arrow and the others. Yi Xian said with a smile, "Do you know what we will face today?" Jianghu looked at Yi Xian. If not for young Master Yi, we would never have been able to reach the self-release realm. Today, the fifth dimension is in trouble, young Master Yi is in trouble, so we will naturally do our best to help. Half of it was friendship, and the other half was profit. In the horizon, Bai Dizzy looked at Yi Xian. A disaster is approaching, yet there are still so many people willing to be with you. How rare. Yi Xian laughed, sacrifice the formation. As his voice fell, Old Li suddenly appeared and roared, "Go out!" Bang! In an instant, the entire world trembled. A huge formation covered the horizon, and the eye of the formation appeared under Yi Xian's feet. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. All around him, the power contained in the formation flowed towards him like a river. This array contained the accumulated power of countless experts in the entire fifth dimension. As Yi Xian's power grew stronger, the world started to tremble. In a short time, Yi Xian's aura was no weaker than a Dao confirmation realm expert. However, Yi Xian still felt that it was not enough, so he took out 2 god seals. Bang! In an instant, a powerful aura swept out from Yi Xian's body like a tidal wave, and the entire world became illusory. Dao confirmation realm. At this moment, Yi Xian had truly reached the Dao confirmation realm. With the addition of the power of the formation, his strength was unprecedentedly powerful. In the starry sky, Bai Dizzy looked at Yi Xian in silence. It had to be said that he was somewhat shocked at this moment. In his opinion, the threat of Yi Xian would come in the future. Mu Niannian was the biggest threat at present, but now it seemed that Yi Xian was a threat to Dao Ting. In the distance, Yi Xian suddenly raised his head and looked at the formation in the depths of the starry sky. He knew that he had to solve this formation. Otherwise, the situation in the fifth dimension would become even worse. Yi Xian took a deep breath and opened his palm. The punishment heaven sword appeared in his hand. He looked at the depths of the starry sky, and the next moment, he held the sword with both hands and fiercely slashed. One sword to determine life and death. As the sword slashed out, the sound of the sword shook the heavens. At the same time, a wisp of sword chi pierced through the sky. Wherever the sword chi passed, the space was annihilated inch by inch. When this wisp of sword chi entered the starry sky, the entire starry sky lost its color. At this moment, there was only this sword in the world. But Bai Dizzy's expression was calm. In the depths of the starry sky, the 28 constellations suddenly separated. The next moment, a huge constellation formation appeared in front of the formation. This formation was the famous 4 constellations divine formation of Dao Ting. It was once used to deal with the Dao tomb. On this formation, there were 28 kinds of constellation beast statues: East, Hornwood Dragon, Kong Gold Dragon, D Earth Raccoon Dog, Room Sun Rabbit, Heart Moon Fox, Tail Fire Tiger, Water Leopard of Winnowing Basket. North, Wood Fighting Dog, Golden Ox Nyo, Girl Earth Bat, Emptiness Sun Rat, Wei Moon Swallow, Room Fire Pig, Wall Water Centipede. West, Wood Wolf of Kuei, Golden Dog of Lu, Stomach Pheasant, Pleiades Sun Rooster, Moon Crow of Bai, Fire Monkey, Water Monkey of Shen. South, Wood Dragon of Well, Golden Goat of Ghost, Earth Deer of Willow, Sun Horse of Star, moon deer of extended net, winged fire snake, water worm of Zhen. At this moment, the constellation divine formation was actually not complete. This was because the 28 constellation masters were not here. They were the Azure Dragon Master of the Eastern Constellation, the Black Tortoise Master of the Northern Constellation, the White Tiger Master of the Western Constellation, and the Vermilion Bird Master of the Southern Constellation. If the 4 constellation masters were here, the power of this formation could easily destroy more than a dozen Dao Defense Realm powerhouses. Even so, the power of this formation at this moment was still very terrifying. At this moment, Yi Xian's shocking sword slashed out. This sword slashed directly on the constellation divine formation. Boom! In an instant, a wave of sword light suddenly erupted from the depths of the starry sky. The sword light dissipated, but the constellation divine formation was still there. The formation behind the constellation divine formation was undamaged. Below, Yi Xian's expression became a little ugly. This sword attack had failed. Not only Yi Xian, but the countless powerhouses of the 5th dimension below also had ugly expressions. The power of Yi Xian's sword attack just now was enough to destroy the heavens and the earth. However, this terrifying sword attack had been blocked by the Great Formation. Below, Yi Xian took a deep breath. Again. As his voice fell, he once again absorbed the power of the 5th dimension Great Formation. This time, he directly absorbed the power of the Great Formation. Boom! The power contained within Yi Xian's body was unprecedentedly strong. Yi Xian looked at the constellation divine formation in the depths of the starry sky, and a fierce smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He suddenly leaped into the depths of the starry sky, and then he slashed at the constellation divine formation with his sword. This sword attack used all of his strength. As the sword slashed down, the starry sky trembled. Boom! In the depths of the starry sky, an earth-shattering explosion suddenly resounded. Then, a wave of sword light erupted from the depths of the starry sky like dazzling fireworks. At this moment, a figure fell from the starry sky. It was Yi Xian. He had failed once again. After stopping, a wisp of blood flowed from the corner of Yi Xian's mouth. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and looked at the formation in the depths of the starry sky. His right hand tightly grasped the sword, and the blood in his body trembled. In the sky, Bai Dizzy looked down at Yi Xian. This formation was formed by 28 Dao Confirmation Realm powerhouses. Not to mention you, even 5 Dao controlling realm powerhouses wouldn't be able to do anything to this formation. Yi Xian said fiercely, "I still want to try." After saying this, he suddenly stomped his right foot, and his entire body shot into the sky. The sword cry shook the heavens and the earth. Bai Dizzy paid no attention to Yi Xian, and he glanced at the surroundings with a trace of bewilderment in his eyes. Logically speaking, the 5th dimension tribulation should have erupted completely by now. However, even though there was a natural disaster in the 5th dimension, it hadn't completely erupted yet. What's going on? Bai Dizzy had a trace of bewilderment in his heart. Down below, Yi Jiming had suddenly appeared by Mu Nianyan's side. At this moment, Mu Nianyan seemed extremely weak, and her face was still pale like a sheet of paper. Her condition wasn't particularly good. Yi Jiming glanced at the surroundings, and then he looked at Mu Nianyan. Mu Nianyan chuckled lightly. "What did you see?" Yi Jiming stared fixedly at Mu Nianyan. "Was it you?" Mu Nianyan smiled faintly, but her smile was pale. "What was it, me?" Yi Jiming suddenly walked in front of Mu Nianyan, and she grabbed Mu Nianyan's hand, and slowly closed her eyes. After a moment, her eyes suddenly opened, and she retreated rapidly. Her eyes were filled with disbelief and fear. "My God! No! Impossible! This is absolutely impossible! You! P.S. Asking for votes." Chapter 1338. Yi Jiming seemed to have seen something, but he seemed to have lost his soul. He kept muttering, "Impossible, Mu Niannian just smiled and did not say anything. She looked up at Yi Xian, who was still fighting in the sky. No one knew what she was thinking. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly opened his palm. The prison pagoda appeared in his hand. He roared, "Dao laws, return." Boom! The power of 9 Dao laws suddenly gathered in Yi Xian's body. At the same time, a powerful force directly enveloped the constellation divine formation. Yi Xian suddenly roared, "Imprison." As his voice fell, a blood-red, "Imprison," word suddenly floated above the constellation divine formation. Boom! In an instant, a blood-red light directly enveloped the entire constellation divine formation. At the same time, Yi Xian's 3 domains appeared at the same time. 3 domains plus the suppression of the prison pagoda. At this moment, the constellation divine formation was actually suppressed. Seeing this scene, Bai Dizzy slightly frowned. Revelation of the 5 directions. As his voice fell, 5 super experts suddenly appeared on the battle path. All 5 were at the peak of the Dao confirming realm. As soon as the 5 appeared, they directly rushed towards Yi Xian. At this moment, Arrow, Agajio, Situ, and Enlancio suddenly disappeared. The 4 directly blocked in front of the revelation of the 5 directions. Both sides did not waste any words and directly fought. Although Arrow and the other 3's realms were weaker than the revelation of the 5 directions, and they were 1 person short, the 4 women did not fall into a disadvantage against the revelation of the 5 directions. Below, 3 lives originally wanted to help, but was stopped by Guan Yin. She looked at 3 lives. 3 lives, we need you to help us block the Yin Qi of the underworld. Not only was the array in the depths of the starry sky destroying the 5-dimensional universe, there was also the Yin Qi and Death Qi from the Yin world. Even the spirit of Dark World found it hard to resist the Yin Qi and Death Qi. It should be said that only the spirit of Dark World could resist it a little. But now, the entire spirit of Dark World was resisting the Yin Qi and Death Qi from the Yin world. However, it was far from enough. In addition, there were still the experts from the Yin world who had yet to make a move. Therefore, 3 lives had to stay behind to resist the Yin world. Right at this moment, a sword howl suddenly resounded from deep within the starry sky. Everyone looked up and saw Yi Xian's sword slash onto the constellation divine formation. Boom! A strand of light erupted once more in the starry sky. The enormous divine constellation formation trembled violently, and then Yi Xian was blasted back once more. However, cracks had appeared on the formation. Moreover, the divine constellation beasts had even become slightly illusory. It worked. Yi Xian was delighted when he witnessed this scene. He was just about to attack when a halberd suddenly tore through the air towards him. Yi Xian subconsciously slashed down with his sword. Bang! The halberd was slashed back, but Yi Xian himself was pushed back by over 100 m, and Divine General Xian Yong wasn't too far away from him. It's this person again. Yi Xian's expression sank. Right at this moment, a voice suddenly resounded from behind Yi Xian. Hey, do you still remember me? Yi Xian was slightly stunned when he heard this. He swiftly turned around and saw a woman standing in front of him. Jian Zizai. Yi Xian was slightly excited. Big Sister Jian, what are you doing here? Jian Zizai roared with laughter. I knew you were in trouble, so I came. A trace of warmth flowed through Yi Xian's heart when he heard this. Meanwhile, Jian Zizai pointed at Xian Yong in the distance. I'll deal with this person. Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. Be careful, Big Sister Jian. Jian Zizai roared with laughter. Don't worry. As soon as she finished speaking, she vanished on the spot. In the distance, Xian Yong frowned slightly and stabbed out with his halberd, causing space to tremble and crack. However, Jian Zizai used his fist to forcefully receive the halberd. The power of his fist was not the slightest bit weaker than the halberd. Seeing this, Yi Xian relaxed. He turned to look at the constellation divine formation, and in the next moment, he rushed over once again. He had to break these two formations, or the situation in the fifth dimension would only worsen, and Sister Nian's situation would also worsen. Seeing Yi Xian rush over once again, the constellation divine formation suddenly trembled. In the next moment, the 28 beast forms suddenly roared, and 28 powerful forces swept out. In the distance, Yi Xian's pupils suddenly shrank, and he suddenly slashed down with his sword. Boom! As the sword slashed down, Yi Xian instantly retreated hundreds of feet, but very quickly, Yi Xian rushed out again. In the sky, Bai Dizzy did not pay attention to Yi Xian. Although Yi Xian was strong, there were 28 people in the 28 constellations, and they were also supported by the formation. No matter how heaven-defying Yi Xian was, it was impossible for him to kill the 28 constellations by himself. Bai Dizzy's gaze was always on Mu Niannian. The person he was most afraid of was this woman. At this time, Mu Niannian did not seem to have made a move. Moreover, although Mu Niannian looked pale, she was very calm. She had always been calm. Why was she so calm? Bai Dizzy suddenly looked to the right. Lord of the Underworld. At this time, the Lord of the Underworld appeared beside Bai Dizzy. The Lord of the Underworld glanced at Mu Niannian below, and there was a trace of fear in the depths of his eyes. Bai Dizzy said indifferently, "We can speed up." The Lord of the Underworld was silent. Bai Dizzy smiled. "Don't worry, if Miss Mu makes a move, there will be people in doubting to restrain her." After a moment of silence, the Lord of the Underworld turned his head. "Open." As his voice fell, on the other side of the starry sky, the space there suddenly split open. Then, countless amounts of blood-red water suddenly gushed out from the split space. The water of the River of Forgetfulness. When the water of the River of Forgetfulness entered this world, the spiritual energy in this world began to dissipate at a terrifying speed. Seeing this scene, the expressions of the countless experts of the fifth dimension below changed. In addition, countless evil spirits suddenly rushed into the world of the living. After these evil spirits entered the world of the living, they began to crazily devour the yang energy and vitality of the world of the living. For a moment, yin and yang were in chaos, and heaven and earth were overturned. Below, Mu Niannian looked at all this calmly. After a moment, she suddenly looked at Yi Jiming and smiled. "Look, how chaotic this world is." Yi Jiming looked at Mu Niannian, clenched his fists, and did not say anything. At this time, Mu Niannian suddenly disappeared. On the horizon, Yi Xian stopped. When he turned around, Mu Niannian just happened to appear in front of him. Seeing Mu Niannian's face as pale as paper, Yi Xian felt very distressed. He tightly grasped Mu Niannian's hand. Mu Niannian looked around and softly said, "The 3,000 Grand Daos have already changed. At the very least, many of them have already changed. This has already gone against the original will of the Grand Daos. In this current world, people are not people, gods are not gods, ghosts are not ghosts." Yi Xian was silent. The Grand Daos. In the past, the Grand Daos were the order of the world. But now, the Grand Daos had already been used by someone. The ones in the wrong were not the Grand Daos, but the guardians of the Grand Daos. In the distance, Bai Dizzy looked at Mu Niannian. Logically speaking, the fifth dimension tribulation should have completely erupted, but it hasn't. It's all because of you. Mu Niannian smiled. Why don't you guess? Bai Dizzy shook his head. Young lady, I have to say, you really surprised me. But now, it's time to end this. As he said this, he looked at Yi Xian. According to our investigation, you seem to have many backers. But if you want to compare numbers and strength, how could you be a match for my doubting? As his voice fell, on the battle path, an old man wearing a Taoist robe and holding a horsetail whisk suddenly appeared. Divine Monarch. When this Divine Monarch appeared, Yi Xian's expression instantly became solemn. After the Divine Monarch appeared, his gaze directly fell on Mu Niannian's body. It was very clear that Bai Dizzy wanted to force Mu Niannian to make a move. This was because as long as Mu Niannian made a move, the destruction of this universe would accelerate. And as the destruction of this universe accelerated, Moon Yanyan's strength would become weaker and weaker. Bai Dizzy's goal was very simple. He wanted to use the smallest price to kill Moon Yanyan and Yi Xian. Because Dao Ting still had an enemy in the Dao Tomb, he couldn't sacrifice too much in the fifth dimension. Beside Moon Yanyan, Yi Xian suddenly took out a box. This was the box he obtained from the sword sect. Yi Xian was about to open the box when Moon Yanyan suddenly shook his head. Yi Xian looked at Moon Yanyan. Moon Yanyan smiled. It's useless. Yi Xian was a bit puzzled. Why? Moon Yanyan smiled. The little guy inside is not good at fighting. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, she can call for help. Moon Yanyan shook his head and smiled. It's useless. The people who can change all of this are very far away from here. Moreover, letting the fifth dimension come early was my choice. Yi Xian's face was filled with shock. Why? Moon Yanyan said in a soft voice, because what will come will come. The reason why I suppressed the fifth dimension is because I was waiting for someone who can deal with the aftermath. After saying that, she looked at Yi Xian and smiled. I've waited for you. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Sister Nian, can't the fifth dimension be suppressed forever? Moon Yanyan shook her head and smiled. It can't. Moreover, the longer I suppress it, the greater the rebound. If I continue to suppress it, the rebound will be very terrifying in the future. It might even be something this universe can't bear. As she spoke, she turned to look at the universe and said softly, actually, this universe is already riddled with holes. I couldn't bear it and forcefully extended its life. But I know that in order to completely preserve this universe, the only way is to destroy the living beings in this universe. However, the living beings in this universe are also a part of this universe. Moreover, if these creatures were destroyed, there would be more to come. There would be new life forms. Destruction still could not cure the root of the problem. The only way is for the living beings of this universe to treat this universe well and coexist with it. In the distance, Bai Dizzy suddenly laughed and said, I'm afraid that this young lady's idea will never come true. Moon Yanyan laughed and looked at the Divine Emperor. The peak of the Dao Defense Realm, half a step to that level. It seems like Dao Ting still thinks highly of me. The Divine Sovereign looked at Moon Yanyan. Please enlighten me. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly disappeared. At this moment, Moon Yanyan shook her head and smiled. She gently stretched out her right hand and pointed with a finger. Boom! In an instant, a figure retreated rapidly in the sky. This retreat was no less than 10,000 feet. Not only that, the Divine Sovereign's physical body actually disappeared. Seeing this scene, Bai Dizzy's expression changed. Yi Xian was also stunned. Although she destroyed the Divine Sovereign's physical body with one punch, Moon Yanyan coughed a few times. Moreover, she coughed up blood. Most importantly, the entire world seemed to have become somewhat illusory. The fifth dimension calamity seemed to have sped up. It was obvious that every time she attacked, it was a disaster for this universe. Moon Yanyan looked down and shook her head. Now is not the time to fully erupt. I have to leave some time for you, little fellow. As soon as she finished speaking, she pressed her left hand down lightly. In an instant, the fifth dimension gradually calmed down. At this moment, Bai Dizzy seemed to have discovered something. Her pupils suddenly shrank. You have been using your own strength to suppress this fifth dimension. Moon Yanyan glanced at Bai Dizzy and smiled. You just realized. Bai Dizzy trembled. How much of your strength have you used to suppress the fifth dimension? The corners of Moon Yanyan's mouth curled up. Take a guess. At this moment, everyone present was stunned. Moon Yanyan was using her own strength to suppress the fifth dimension. What did this mean? It meant that the current her was not at her peak state. Yi Xian trembled. Sister Nian, how much strength have you used to suppress the entire fifth dimension? 70%. At this moment, Yi Jiming, who was not far away, suddenly spoke. She stared at Mu Niannian. For countless years, she has been using 70% of her strength to suppress this fifth dimension. Her current strength is only 30% of her peak state. It's not even 30%. Yi Jiming's voice trembled. Everyone present was stunned. Including Yi Xian. Not even 30% of her peak state was already so terrifying. If Sister Nian withdrew her 70%, how terrifying would it be? Up in the sky, the White Emperor's son was also stunned. 30%. Heavens! The woman in front of him had only used 30% of her strength to kill a divine monarch. 30%. How was this possible? Bai Dizzy held an important position in the Daoting world. What kind of experts had he not seen in his life? But at this moment, he was panicking. He was really panicking. The Lord of the Underworld no longer had fear in his eyes. It was fear. True fear. There was actually such a terrifying expert in this world. 30% of her strength. In the distance, Yi Jiming looked at Mu Niannian. No wonder you said that no medicine could heal your injuries. Your injuries were not caused by others but by yourself. No, you are not injured at all. You are using your life to prolong the life of this fifth dimension. Mu Niannian smiled faintly. Her smile was still a little pale. What a smart girl. Yi Jiming stared at Mu Niannian. As long as you give up on the fifth dimension, not only will you recover, you will also be invincible in this world. Mu Niannian shook her head and smiled. My injuries will recover. However, this fifth dimension will collapse in an instant. As for being invincible in this world, after those 3 swords leave this world, I will indeed be invincible. No, this is too arrogant. I have to keep a low profile. Everyone, Yi Jiming looked at Mu Niannian. If you don't give up on the fifth dimension, you will die. Mu Niannian smiled and looked at Yi Xian. I will do one last thing for you. After saying that, she pulled Yi Xian's hand and appeared on the battle path. Yi Xian said with a trembling voice, Sister Nian, what are you going to do? Mu Niannian's lips curled up. To Daoting. Yi Xian, in the distance, Bai Dizzy said with a trembling voice, arrogant. Woman, you only have 30% of your strength. You dare, you. On the battle path, Mu Niannian laughed without turning her head. So what if it's 30%? With 30%, I, Mu Niannian, will still be invincible in this world. Chapter 1339. Invincible in the world. This sentence floated between heaven and earth. No one thought that Mu Niannian was boasting. She could kill a divine monarch with 30% of her strength. This strength could not be described with words. If Mu Niannian was willing to give up the fifth dimension, how terrifying would she be at her peak? It was unimaginable. Even the White Emperor's son, the Star Lord of the Dao Court, could not have imagined it. At this moment, Yi Xian, who was on the fight path, suddenly stopped. Mu Niannian looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian grinned and said with a trembling voice, Sister Nian, let's let Daoting go. Mu Niannian smiled, I won't die. Yi Xian shook his head and held Mu Niannian's hand tightly. You know, I have practiced Buddhism. Buddhism is merciful. Let's let Daoting go. Mu Niannian smiled gently. You are afraid that I will die? Yi Xian nodded. Mu Niannian smiled. Besides your Qing, no one can kill me. Yi Xian looked at Mu Niannian and said firmly, I won't go Daoting. Mu Niannian smiled, it's really fine. Yi Xian shook his head and said with a trembling voice, Sister Nian, I also know how to trick people, don't trick me. Mu Niannian was silent. Yi Xian looked at Mu Niannian and was about to speak when Mu Niannian suddenly said, Daoting will not let you go. Yi Xian said, I know, but we won't go Daoting today. Mu Niannian looked at Yi Xian for a moment and said with a smile, I promise you, I will not die. Sister Nian has never made a promise to anyone, but this time, I promise you. Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, Mu Niannian smiled and said, doubting, I must go. Not only for you, but also for a wish of mine. I've always wanted to have a real fight. Unfortunately, your Qing is too strong. I'm afraid I'll be killed if I fight her. Doubting is the only way. Moreover, if I can't come back alive, why would I bring you along? Am I supposed to bring you along to die? Idiot. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, really? Mu Niannian nodded. I promise you, we will definitely come back alive. As she spoke, she seemed to have thought of something. She turned her head to look at the Lord of the Underworld, who was not far away. The latter's expression changed greatly, and just as he was about to retreat, Mu Niannian pointed a finger at him. Boom! The space where the Lord of the Nether Realm stood exploded, and the Lord of the Nether Realm was instantly killed. Mu Niannian raised her head to look at the path in front of her, and then she smiled and said, let's go. Let's go take a look at Doubting. As soon as she finished speaking, she pulled Yi Xian along as she walked towards the end of the path. Along the way, Mu Niannian ceaselessly sized up the surroundings, and her face was filled with a smile, even though it was a very pale smile. In next to no time, Mu Niannian and Yi Xian vanished at the end of the path. The White Emperor's disciples suddenly vanished along with the 28 lunar mansions. Suddenly, Mu Niannian and Yi Xian appeared in front of an enormous heaven gate. Doubting Heaven Gate. This gate was 300 m long and wide, and it was the main entrance to Doubting. As soon as Mu Niannian and Yi Xian appeared before the main entrance, four Guardian Generals suddenly appeared in front of Mu Niannian, and then the Guardian General shouted furiously. Who dares trespass into the Heaven Gate? Just at this moment, Mu Niannian suddenly vanished on the spot. Hiss! A strand of sword light flashed through the battlefield. Four bloody heads flew into the air, and blood splattered everywhere. It was an instant kill. Mu Niannian turned to look at Yi Xian, and she smiled mischievously. Isn't it amazing? Yi Xian gave a thumbs up. Sister Nian is invincible. Mu Niannian laughed, and then she pointed at the Heaven Gate. This is the Doubting Heaven Gate, and behind this gate is the legendary 36 heavens. The higher you go, the denser the innate spiritual energy is, and the closer you are to the Milky Way, the denser the star essence is. It can be said that there are very few places in the world that can compare to Doubting in terms of spiritual energy. Yi Xian was about to speak, but Bai Dizzy suddenly appeared in front of Mu Niannian, and there were 4 people behind him. The 4 divine generals of Doubting. These 4 people were not in the Dao validation realm, but the peak of the Dao defense realm. Mu Niannian chuckled. Just the 4 of them? Bai Dizzy looked at Mu Niannian. Miss, we have no intention of offending the 5-dimensional universe. Is it worth it for you to be enemies with the Doubting for a human? Is it worth it? Mu Niannian shook her head and smiled. You have to understand that it is you who has always been enemies with us. Bai Dizzy looked at Mu Niannian. If he is willing to hand over the Dao scripture, the Doubting will not kill him. From now on, the Doubting and the 5-dimensional universe will mind our own business. Mu Niannian suddenly turned to look at Yi Xian. Remember, never trust the enemy. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, I understand. Trust the enemy? How retarded would that be? Mu Niannian looked at Bai Dizzy and smiled. If he hands over the Dao scripture, he will temporarily keep his life. However, the Doubting will still think of a way to kill him, right? White Emperor. Z was silent. In fact, the Doubting, Yi Xian, and Mu Niannian could not be friendly. Whether it was Mu Niannian or Yi Xian, the Doubting would not let them go. Those who posed a threat to them had to be exterminated by the roots. If the Doubting had been more ruthless, the Dao tomb would not have appeared. If the roots were not eliminated, Yi Xian and Mu Niannian would be a disaster in the future. Mu Niannian suddenly looked at the 4 divine generals. The 4 divine generals were about to attack when Bai Dizzy suddenly said, Stand down. The 4 heavenly kings did not hesitate and retreated to the side. Bai Dizzy looked at Moon Yinyan. The purpose of this trip can't be to destroy the doubting, right? Moon Yinyan smiled. What do you think? Bai Dizzy was silent for a moment and then respectfully retreated to the side. At this time, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared in front of Moon Yinyan. This person was the doubting's current Tao ancestor. The doubting's strongest expert. The doubting was not stupid enough to send an ordinary expert to deal with Moon Yinyan. Why? Because doing so would be sending them to their deaths. This Moon Yinyan could even kill a god monarch in a second. Sending someone else would only be sending them to their deaths, making the doubting's losses even greater. Therefore, when Bai Dizzy returned to the doubting, he immediately informed the Tao ancestor. Moon Yinyan was worthy of the doubting's strongest expert. The Tao ancestor appeared. Only the Tao ancestor personally took action could prevent the doubting from losing any experts. Otherwise, it would be useless to send anyone else. This woman was really too strong. After the Tao ancestor appeared, he looked at Moon Yinyan and smiled. The purpose of your trip is not to destroy the doubting, but to find me. Moon Yinyan smiled. Why do you say that? The Tao ancestor pointed at Yi Xian. Although this person has the calamity cause, his fate is extremely strong. In the entire doubting, the only person who has 100% chance of breaking his fate is me. Therefore, your target is me. The smile on Moon Yinyan's face gradually disappeared. Yi Xian looked at Moon Yinyan. Moon Yinyan smiled. As expected of the Tao ancestor. You can see the problem at a glance. The Tao ancestor looked at Moon Yinyan. With 30% of your strength, you can kill a divine lord. You surprised me, but you can't kill me. Therefore, I guess you want to seriously injure me. Moon Yinyan smiled. Do you think I can do it? The Tao ancestor looked down and said, if you are willing to give up the 5th dimension and let yourself be in a peak state, I will be wary of you. Your current state. Saying this, he shook his head. You can't do it. Moon Yinyan laughed. I'll try. The Tao ancestor nodded. Then let's try. Moon Yinyan opened her palm and a sword appeared in her hand. The next moment, she suddenly attacked. This sword stabbed towards the Tao ancestor. It was a very calm sword. Even the world's top swordsman, Yi Xian, could not see what was special about this sword. Opposite of Moon Yinyan, the Tao ancestor squinted his eyes. There was a trace of seriousness in his eyes. When the sword arrived in front of him, he suddenly pointed with his fingers. This point directly touched the tip of the sword. There were no energy fluctuations. Everything was very calm. Gradually, the Tao ancestor's body started to become illusory. Not far away, the White Emperor's son's expression changed drastically. At this moment, Moon Yinyan suddenly retracted her sword. A smile appeared on her face. The Tao ancestor looked at Moon Yinyan. His body became more and more illusory. At this moment, Moon Yinyan suddenly disappeared. She raised her sword and attacked. Bai Dizzy's expression changed. He looked at the Tao ancestor. The Tao ancestor said softly, let her kill. Soon, Moon Yinyan killed her way to the 33rd heaven. All the heavenly generals in the 33rd heaven were killed. At the entrance of the 34th heaven, Moon Yinyan suddenly stopped. She looked at the entrance for a long time and then turned to leave. In front of the heavenly gate, Moon Yinyan held Yi Xian's hand and said with a smile, let's go. Yi Xian was stunned. It was over? At this moment, the Tao ancestor suddenly said, you injured me. Even if I don't attack, I doubting someone can still kill him. So, what's your next move? Moon Yinyan said with a smile, you'll know soon. With that, she pulled Yi Xian and disappeared from the southern heavenly gate. At this moment, a heavenly general suddenly appeared in front of the Tao ancestor. The heavenly general knelt on one knee. Tao ancestor, the army of the Tao tomb has invaded. The leader is Luo Ho. Hearing this, the Tao ancestor narrowed his eyes and said softly, "This is your next move." Bai Dizzy said in a deep voice, "Tao ancestor, if this woman is not killed, I doubting the future." The Tao ancestor suddenly said, "She's already dead." Bai Dizzy suddenly looked up, his eyes filled with disbelief. Under the southern heavenly gate, Mu Niannian and Yi Xian walked slowly. Yi Xian glanced at Mu Niannian. On the surface, Mu Niannian looked fine. But for some reason, Yi Xian felt uneasy. Mu Niannian suddenly smiled and said, "The Tao ancestor was crippled by me." Yes. He must heal in a short period of time because he didn't dare to not heal. He didn't dare to let himself be injured when facing the person in the Tao tomb. Just now, I slaughtered all the experts in the 33 heavens. This is what I promised others. In return, the Tao tomb will send out troops. At this time, the Tao Ting will not care about you because the threat of the Tao tomb will be greater. Simply put, you now have at least half a year. Saying that, she looked at Yi Xian and smiled. Remember, although the Tao tomb and the Tao Ting are sworn enemies, they are still not trustworthy. Tao breakers want the Tao scriptures more than the Tao Ting because the complete Tao scriptures can restrain the Tao Ting. Therefore, the Tao tomb should not cooperate with them if you can, because most of the time, they are more terrifying than the Tao Ting. Even if you cooperate with them, you must be careful. Yi Xian was about to speak, but Mu Niannian smiled and said, "Let me finish. You only have half a year, maybe not even half a year. And in this half a year, if you want to reach the Tao testimony realm, you must reach the Tao testimony realm. Of course, even if you reach the Tao testimony realm, you can't fight against the Tao tomb and the Tao Ting alone. Therefore, you must find the Tao scriptures, gather all of them, and awaken the great Tao spirit so that it can help you. Remember, no matter what method you use, you must let the great Tao spirit help you." Saying that, she coughed and then continued, "In the 3,000 great Taos, not all the great Tao protectors are bad. There are also many good ones. You can befriend those good great Tao protectors, or you can find a way to obtain more God seals. You are now the Lord of the five-dimensional universe, so as long as you can make the creatures of the five-dimensional universe sincerely submit to you, they will believe in you and follow your great Tao laws. This way, your strength will increase, and the more God seals you have, the stronger you will be." Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, Mu Niannian continued, "A long time ago, the world was in chaos. The sky tilted to the northwest and the earth sank to the southeast. The great Tao was not complete, so an expert used a 5-color divine stone to repair the world, and the 3 lives technique was one of them. She didn't know how terrifying she was. Furthermore, this girl's temperament isn't bad, and she trusts you. You can cultivate her 3 lives art. This art is indeed only inferior to the Tao scripture's mental cultivation method. After you cultivate the 3 lives art, you will obtain the power of 3 lives. This power can fuse with your sword Tao, allowing it to reach a new height. This is because the 3 lives technique itself is a kind of great Tao." Saying that, she paused for a moment, then continued, "There is also Yi Jiming. She comes from the Great Abyss, a group of sinners from the ancient God era. They also want the Tao scriptures because they can wash away their sins and allow them to escape. Yi Jiming follows you for this purpose. I have observed this girl, and her feelings for you are a bit complicated. You must be on guard against her, because in the future, it is very likely that she will choose to abandon you for her family. Of course, it is also possible that she will abandon her people for you. In any case, you must be on your guard and not fall into her trap." Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, Mu Niannian continued, "The Lord of the Underworld has already been destroyed by me. Right now, the Underworld is like a group of dragons without a leader. You can take over the Underworld and rule over those ghosts, but you must be careful. In the 18 levels of the Underworld, there is a Tao breaker. This person is extremely powerful, and I originally wanted to kill him to get rid of a hidden danger for you. However, this person is also a pitiful person, and he has never had any ill intentions towards you, so I spared his life." Saying that, she looked at Yi Xian and smiled. "Remember, in the future, you must think twice before you act." There is nothing wrong with thinking more and being more cautious. Especially now, you must learn to hide your strength. Right now, you have not reached the point where those forces will stop at nothing to kill you, but if you show off a bit more, they will stop at nothing to kill you. Yi Xian said with a trembling voice, Sister Nian, why are you saying this to me? Mu Nian smiled, because I am already dead. After saying that, she suddenly went limp. Yi Xian's expression changed greatly, and he hurriedly hugged Mu Nian and said with a trembling voice, Sister Nian, you were fine. What nonsense are you talking about? Mu Nian reached out and gently wiped away the tears on Yi Xian's cheeks. Don't blame yourself, don't be sad, because this is my own choice. I have protected the fifth dimension for countless years, and I have long been exhausted. I am already very satisfied to be able to meet you in my final moments. However, from now on, you will really have to walk alone. Also, after I die, bring me back to the fifth dimension, and then bury my body in the starry sky of the fifth dimension. My soul will scatter between heaven and earth. I was born in the fifth dimension, so naturally, when I die, I will naturally die in the fifth dimension. Also, when the time comes, remember to cook a few roasted fish for me. No. Yi Xian tightly hugged Mu Nian, sobbing uncontrollably. Mu Nian gently stroked Yi Xian's cheek with her left hand, feeling a little heartache. Before, I was not afraid of death at all, because a long time ago, I had already thought of this ending. But now, I am a little afraid of death. Because I am afraid that after I die, there will be no one to protect you. But, Sister Nian is really tired, Sister Nian wants to have a good rest. As her voice fell, her breath was almost gone. Finally, Mu Nian turned her head and looked at the fifth dimension that she had protected for countless years. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly. This was the last time she smiled. It was also the last time she saw it. Now, she could finally rest. P.S. Asking for tickets. Chapter 1340. In the starry sky, Yi Xian tightly hugged Mu Nian, sobbing like a child. In his embrace, Mu Nian had already stopped breathing. As if he had thought of something, Yi Xian took out all the violet energy he had for Mu Nian to absorb. However, it was useless. The moment the violet energy entered Mu Nian's body, it automatically dispersed. Seeing this, Yi Xian sat paralyzed in the starry sky. His eyes were empty, as if he had lost his soul. At this time, a white figure suddenly appeared not far away from Yi Xian. This white figure was Linger, who had been following Mu Nian all this time. Yi Xian suddenly looked at Linger. She didn't die, right? Linger held Mu Nian's hand and softly said, she is already dead. Yi Xian's voice trembled. How? How is that possible? Sister Nian is so strong. She only used 30% of her strength to seriously injure a Dao ancestor. How could she die? Impossible. Linger glanced at Yi Xian. On her face, 2 streams of clear liquid slowly flowed, 90,000 years. She used her body to suppress the fifth dimension for 90,000 years. Every time the fifth dimension tribulation came, she was the one who endured it. Although she suppressed the fifth dimension tribulation, she suffered a backlash. Yi Xian tightly hugged Mu Nian. His body could not stop trembling. How could you be so stupid? Linger softly said, just like she said, this was her own choice. She chose death. For you, for the fifth dimension. Yi Xian looked at Linger. Linger wiped the tears on her face. In fact, the fifth dimension tribulation can no longer be suppressed. The more it is suppressed, the greater the backlash will be in the future. Therefore, she chose to let the fifth dimension tribulation come early. With that, she looked down and softly said, the reason why the fifth dimension tribulation has not completely erupted is because she is suppressing it. In other words, she withstood at least 90% of the fifth dimension tribulation's power. You saw her weak before not because she made a move, but because her body was withstanding the fifth dimension tribulation. Yi Xian looked at Linger. She could withstand it before, so why couldn't she withstand it this time? Ling looked at Yi Xian. Because this time, there is a man-made disaster. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Doubting. Ling continued, you don't need to blame yourself too much. This is her choice. She chose to save the fifth dimension. If she doesn't choose the five-dimensional universe, the Tao court won't be able to do anything to her. If she doesn't give up on the five-dimensional universe, her injuries will only worsen. Yi Xian shook his head. You're wrong. Ling looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said softly, she went to Daoting for me. If she didn't go to Daoting, she wouldn't have died, right? Ling looked at Yi Xian. She clenched her fists as tears poured out of her eyes. It's you, it's you. If not for you, she wouldn't have died. With that, she suddenly knelt down in front of Mu Nianyan's body. She clutched Mu Nianyan tightly and wailed, you fool. I've already told you to stay out of his business, but you just wouldn't listen. He's a person with a calamity cause. At the side, Yi Xian's eyes were empty, as if he had lost his soul. Two streams of clear liquid flowed down his face. Ling suddenly looked at Yi Xian. She stared at Yi Xian. Do you know why she went to Daoting? Because she wanted to buy time for you. And now, she used her life to buy time for you for half a year. If not for you, although she would have been seriously injured, she wouldn't have died. It's you, you're the one who killed her. Yi Xian hugged Mu Nianyan tightly. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Ling still wanted to say something. At this time, Yi Xian's black hair began to turn white. In just a few breaths, Yi Xian's black hair had turned snow white. Seeing this, Ling was stunned. She didn't say anything. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly picked up Mu Nianyan. He gently stroked Mu Nianyan's messy hair and grinned. Sister Nian, let's go home. Back to the five-dimensional universe. Yi Xian carried Mu Nianyan's body and walked down. Yi Xian brought Mu Nianyan's body to the five-dimensional universe. After arriving in the five-dimensional universe, Mu Nianyan's body gradually became illusory. In her body, a force spread out and finally dissipated between heaven and earth like a light breeze. That was Mu Nianyan's soul power. Yi Xian wanted to catch it, but it was impossible, not even with the soul-suppressing sword. In Little Soul's words, this soul has dispersed. After Mu Nianyan's soul dispersed between heaven and earth, her body suddenly changed. In the end, the Mu Nianyan in Yi Xian's arms turned into a pure white kitten. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian was stunned. At this moment, he finally understood why Mu Nianyan liked to eat fish so much. Yi Xian brought Mu Nianyan to the starry sky where she often roasted fish. It was very quiet here. He placed Mu Nianyan's body in the starry sky. From this position, he could overlook the five-dimensional universe below. The body was buried in the starry sky, the soul returned to heaven and earth. Yi Xian looked at Mu Nianyan. After a long time, he smiled and said, Sister Nian, have a good rest. With that, he turned and left. And he was not going back to the five-dimensional universe. On the side, Ling said with a trembling voice, Where are you going? Yi Xian did not turn his head. Ling was about to say something when a black object suddenly fell in front of her. Prison pagoda. Yi Xian left behind the prison pagoda. What was he going to do? Ling was somewhat confused. At this time, Big Sister's voice suddenly sounded from inside the prison pagoda, Not good, he's going to do something stupid. Quickly stop him. Ling was stunned. Then, she hurriedly chased after him. However, Yi Xian had already disappeared into the starry sky. Ling angrily roared at the starry sky, You're going to die. In the depths of the starry sky, a voice slowly floated over, Then die. Yi Xian once again arrived in front of the heavenly gate. One person, one sword. Just as Yi Xian arrived in front of the heavenly gate, Bai Dizzy appeared in front of him. Bai Dizzy looked at the white-haired Yi Xian and shook his head. Stupid. Haven't you heard that 10 years is not too late for a gentleman to take revenge? Coming here now is very stupid. 10 years? Yi Xian grinned. This daddy can't wait that long. As his voice fell, a blood-red aura suddenly swept out from his body. Bang! In an instant, the sky above the heavenly gate turned blood-red. Bloodline activation. At this moment, Yi Xian completely entered a crazed state. This time, he did not rely on the sword spirit. Kill. That was the only thought in Yi Xian's mind. After he completely activated the power of the bloodline, the sword spirit in his hand also turned blood-red at this moment. Usually, he was unable to unleash the sword spirit's power. However, after the bloodline activation, he could unleash at least 30% of the sword spirit's power. The crazier the owner of this sword, the stronger it was. Seeing Yi Xian's aura skyrocket, Bai Dizzy frowned slightly. The power of the bloodline was a little beyond his expectations. At this moment, a man suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. This person was God General Xian Yong. Looking at the blood-red Yi Xian, Xian Yong gradually frowned. At this moment, Yi Xian made him feel danger. The stronger the murderous intent, the stronger the power of the bloodline. At this moment, Yi Xian's murderous intent had never been so strong. Kill. At this moment, only killing intent remained in Yi Xian's mind. Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. Xian Yong's eyes narrowed slightly as he stabbed his halberd forward. Bang! An expanse of blood-red light suddenly erupted, and then Xian Yong was instantly pushed over 1 kilometer back. As soon as he stopped moving, the halberd in his hand had suddenly cracked apart. Bai Dizzy frowned slightly when he witnessed this scene. Xian Yong gazed at Yi Xian with a trace of disbelief in his eyes. Suddenly, Yi Xian roared furiously, "Kill!" As soon as he finished speaking, a ray of blood-red light suddenly arrived in front of Xian Yong. Xian Yong's eyes narrowed slightly as he raised his halberd to block it. Bang! An explosion resounded as Xian Yong was pushed 3 kilometers back. This time, the halberd in his hand had been slashed into pieces. Xian Yong raised his head to gaze at Yi Xian. In the end, his gaze descended onto the sword in Yi Xian's grasp. What sort of sword is that? It was actually able to shatter me. Right at this moment, Yi Xian vanished on the spot again. Xian Yong's pupils constricted, and then he clenched his right hand into a fist and smashed it forward. At the instant he punched forward, the space in front of him had instantly transformed into a strange vortex. A strand of obliterating energy swept out from within the vortex, and it collided head-on with Yi Xian's blood-red ray of light. Rumble. An expanse of blood-red light suddenly erupted from the heaven entrance, and then a figure retreated repeatedly. It was Xian Yong. Xian Yong hadn't even stopped moving when Yi Xian slashed once more. A wisp of ferocity flashed through Xian Yong's eyes, and then he clenched his fists tightly and smashed them forward. Rumble. The space in the surroundings suddenly trembled violently while Xian Yong instantly retreated explosively. At this moment, his strength had been directly suppressed by the energy of Yi Xian's bloodline and sword Dao. Bai Dizzy's face fell when he witnessed this scene. He noticed that Yi Xian's aura was growing stronger and stronger. What sort of bloodline is this? Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly vanished with his blood-red sword in hand. Bai Dizzy's expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly said, "Watch out." On the other side, Xian Yong seemed to have sensed something, and his pupils had suddenly constricted to the size of needles. He swiftly swept his arms forward, and a strand of formidable force swept out from within him like a volcanic eruption. Using defense as offense. Meanwhile, 2 mysterious forces suddenly enveloped the surroundings. The sword domain and blood domain. The sword domain and blood domain were countless times stronger than before. Especially the blood domain. After Yi Xian activated the energy of his bloodline, the blood domain was unprecedentedly strong. A strand of blood-red ray of light suddenly slashed down from within the blood domain. Hiss. The energy that Xian Yong had released was directly shattered by this sword. At the same time, Yi Xian's sword slashed directly into the top of Xian Yong's head, and Xian Yong's body was directly cut into two. Xian Yong's soul was just about to flee when the sword in Yi Xian's hand had suddenly transformed into the soul-quelling sword, and the soul-quelling sword directly entered the space between the brows of Xian Yong's soul. Bang! Xian Yong's formidable soul was directly absorbed. A sword slashed through the body. A sword slashed through the soul. Yi Xian gestured with his right hand, and the soul-quelling sword flew back into his hand. Then, he raised the sword and killed his way into the heaven gate without looking back. Behind him was a sea of blood. Killing intent arose, and the world was slaughtered. If he didn't go mad, he wouldn't survive. Chapter 1341. In front of the heavenly gate, Bai Dizzy looked at the dismembered Xian Yong with an extremely ugly expression. He did not expect that Yi Xian would become so powerful after activating the power of his bloodline. He had killed a divine general. At this moment, Bai Dizzy's eyes were solemn. The Dao Ting was currently empty because Luo Ho had personally led the army of the Dao Tomb, so most of the experts of the Dao Ting had gone to the celestial abyss. As if he had thought of something, Bai Dizzy suddenly said, "Quickly recall the 4 heavenly kings." A voice rang out behind Bai Dizzy. "Yes, sir." At this moment, a heavenly general suddenly appeared in front of Bai Dizzy. He bowed respectfully and said in a trembling voice, "Sir, Yi Xian has already killed his way into the first heaven." Hearing this, Bai Dizzy narrowed his eyes and was about to speak when another heavenly general appeared in front of Bai Dizzy. "Sir, Yi Xian has already killed his way into the 6th heaven." Bai Dizzy was speechless. At this moment, Yi Xian had already killed his way into the 11th heaven. In fact, there was originally a super expert guarding each of the 36 heavens. However, Mu Nianyan had already killed the expert guarding the 36 heavens. In addition, most of the super experts of the Dao Ting were in the celestial abyss, so Yi Xian was almost invincible along the way. He killed his way to the 11th heaven, and during this period, he had killed at least 1,000 heavenly generals. They were all instant kills. At this moment, the power of his sword was difficult to resist even for Dao confirmation experts. Soon, Yi Xian killed his way to the 20th heaven, and at this moment, the experts he encountered were all Dao confirmation experts. However, these Dao confirmation experts were still unable to stop him. Mu Nianyan only killed the strongest experts of each heaven, but Yi Xian was different. He killed everyone he saw. It could be said that he had killed almost all the experts of each heaven. Under such a massacre, Yi Xian's killing intent grew stronger and stronger. Just as Yi Xian arrived at the 21st heaven, Bai Dizzy suddenly appeared in front of him. Bai Dizzy stared at Yi Xian. At this moment, he was extremely shocked. Because he noticed that Yi Xian's aura was at least twice as strong as when he was in the heavenly gate. This guy was getting stronger and stronger. How could this be? Bai Dizzy looked at Yi Xian. Soon, he discovered the crux of the problem. The power of bloodline. Yi Xian's bloodline power was getting stronger and stronger. What kind of bloodline power was this? Bai Dizzy frowned slightly. He'd investigated Yi Xian earlier, but he'd neglected Yi Xian's bloodline. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly looked at Bai Dizzy. He was about to attack when a furious shout resounded from afar, "How dare you!" As soon as the voice resounded, a ray of black light flashed. Yi Xian turned around and slashed down with his sword. Bang! That black light directly exploded, and Yi Xian also retreated more than 100 feet. A robust middle-aged man stood in front of Yi Xian. The middle-aged man wore golden armor, held a golden hammer in his left hand, and held an umbrella in his right. It was one of the 4 heavenly kings of Dao Ting, Multilore. Bai Dizzy frowned slightly when he saw Multilore. "Multilore, why are you alone?" Multilore glanced at Bai Dizzy. "Starlord, the battle at the celestial abyss is very intense." Bai Dizzy's face sank when he heard this. Meanwhile, Multilore looked at Yi Xian. I alone am enough to kill this kid. Bai Dizzy looked at Multilore. Don't be careless and underestimate him. Multilore laughed. I know. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly leaped up and smashed his hammer down at Yi Xian. The 22 levels of the celestial abyss trembled violently like an earthquake, and it was extremely shocking. Yi Xian suddenly raised his head, and his eyes were like a sea of blood that struck fear into the hearts of others. Yi Xian didn't dodge, and he just stabbed with his sword. In an instant, a blood technique drowned him and Multilore. Bang! Along with a loud bang that shook the heavens, a figure retreated rapidly, and he retreated for an entire 300 m. It was Yi Xian. Within that bloody light, Multilore casually swung his hammer, and the bloody light was instantly dispersed. Multilore looked into the distance and sneered, this kid has some ability, to actually be able to take my punch head on. Again. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished on the spot, and in the next moment, a golden hammer suddenly smashed down from above Yi Xian's head. Under this hammer strike, the space around Yi Xian directly warped. Yi Xian suddenly raised his head and roared furiously. A bloody light shot into the sky from his body, and this bloody light actually forcefully blocked that shocking hammer strike. Multilore's expression changed at the sight of this. What kind of bloodline power is this? At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. Multilore's eyes narrowed slightly, and he suddenly swung his hammer horizontally to the side. Bang! A bloody light suddenly exploded from the golden hammer, and Multilore instantly retreated explosively. At this moment, Yi Xian pressed forward, and in an instant, countless bloody sword lights drowned Multilore. Boom! 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 Explosions resounded incessantly in the 21st level of heaven. Even though Yi Xian hadn't been able to instantly kill Multilore, he'd been able to suppress him. Bai Dizzy's expression grew even more unsightly at the sight of this. At this moment, Yi Xian was a little ridiculously strong. After all, Multilore had encountered a realm. But Yi Xian was actually able to rely on this bloodline power to fight Multilore that was 2 realms above him. This wasn't just heaven-defying, it was abnormal. Bloodline power. Bai Dizzy stared fixedly at Yi Xian. He knew that Dao Yi's bloodline power was very special and extremely powerful. However, he'd never seen or even heard of a bloodline like Yi Xian's. Suddenly, a huge explosion resounded from afar, and it interrupted Bai Dizzy's thoughts. He looked towards the distance and saw that Multilore had actually been pushed over 1 kilometer back, and he was surrounded by boundless blood-red sword energy. Multilore suddenly opened the umbrella in his right hand, and then countless strands of golden light surged out from within it. Hiss! 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 In an instant, countless strands of blood-red sword chi were torn apart by the golden light, and the sound of something being torn apart resounded incessantly. On the other hand, Yi Xian was blasted back repeatedly by the golden light, and he was pushed back by almost 3 kilometers. When he stopped moving, there was a huge golden net in front of him. Multilore suddenly shook the umbrella in his hand. Retract. Bang! The umbrella shook violently, and then the huge golden net suddenly moved towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian stood on the spot, and he suddenly stabbed with his sword when the golden net arrived in front of him. It was a single strike that contained 3 domains. Bang! The golden net was forcefully stopped by Yi Xian's attack. Right at this moment, the umbrella in Polylore's hands suddenly vanished. In the next moment, countless strands of golden energy slashed towards Yi Xian. Hiss! 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 The blood-red light around Yi Xian exploded apart inch by inch. At the same time, Multilore suddenly appeared above Yi Xian, and the golden hammer in his hand smashed down. As soon as the hammer descended, the space around Yi Xian warped into a strange shape. Yi Xian raised his head, and then 2 rays of blood-red light suddenly slashed forward. Bang! The 2 rays of sword energy struck the golden hammer, causing it to tremble violently. However, it merely stopped for a moment, and it wasn't able to stop the hammer from descending. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly stabbed the golden hammer with his sword. It was a head-on collision. Rumble. The entire 21st level of heaven suddenly trembled violently. The multitude heavenly king retreated rapidly in the air, while Yi Xian retreated nearly 1,000 feet. Suddenly, Yi Xian roared furiously. He leaped up with his sword in hand and slashed towards Multilore. Multilore's expression changed, and he raised the umbrella in his hand. Bang! A wave of blood-red light erupted from the top of the umbrella. Crack! The treasured umbrella immediately cracked open. Polylore's expression changed drastically at the sight of this, and he subconsciously put away his umbrella. At this moment, Yi Xian's sword stabbed towards his forehead. Polylore didn't choose to retreat, nor could he. He swung his golden hammer horizontally, and this swing was aimed directly at Yi Xian's head. A life for a life. Yi Xian didn't put his sword away. Multilore didn't put his hammer away either. Hiss. Yi Xian's sword stabbed into Multilore's throat, but Multilore's hammer stopped a few inches away from Yi Xian's head. Because a sword had blocked this hammer strike. Soul-suppressing sword. Soul-suppressing sword had attacked by itself, and it had nothing to do with Yi Xian. The spirit sword was protecting its master. Yi Xian's soul-suppressing sword was no ordinary soul-suppressing sword. After absorbing the souls of countless powerhouses, the sword had proven itself. Even without Yi Xian, it was still comparable to a Dao validation powerhouse. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly put away his sword spirit, and it turned back into soul-suppressing sword. He stabbed the sword into the center of Multilore's forehead once more. Boom! In the blink of an eye, Multilore's soul was absorbed. Dual swords. One sword to cut the body. One sword to shatter the soul. When he saw Multilore's death, Dizzy slowly clenched his right hand. He didn't attack. Because he was a Star Lord, one of the few people in the Daoting who wasn't good at fighting. He was a civil official in the Daoting, and was in charge of the Daoting's affairs. As for fighting, it wasn't something he was good at. Of course, it wasn't that he didn't know how to fight, he just wasn't good at it. Yi Xian put away soul-suppressing sword, and he took a deep breath. In an instant, Multilore's blood was directly absorbed by him. Along the way, he had absorbed the blood of every single person he killed. Soul-suppressing sword absorbed souls, and he devoured blood. After absorbing Multilore's blood, Yi Xian turned to look at Dizzy. Dizzy took a deep look at Yi Xian, and quietly disappeared. Yi Xian carried the two swords and continued forward. Soon, he arrived at the 22nd heaven, and there was no one in the 22nd heaven. Previously, Dizzy had already ordered everyone in the 22nd heaven to retreat. Those people staying in the 22nd heaven would be sending them to their deaths. Seeing that there was no one in the 22nd heaven, Yi Xian continued forward. This time, he moved faster. In front of the heavenly gate, Dizzy suddenly looked at a heavenly general. Go to the two worlds abyss and tell True Martial Divine Lord that Multilore is dead. The heavenly general bowed respectfully and quietly left. Dizzy looked at the 36th heaven, and said, I want to know where this person's bloodline comes from. Quickly investigate. Yes, sir. A voice came from not far behind Dizzy. Dizzy slowly closed his eyes. Weeds must be cut by the roots. P.S. Asking for votes. Chapter 1342. At this moment, Yi Xian had already killed his way to the 27th heaven. Now, Yi Xian was covered in blood. Massacre. Yi Xian himself did not realize that the stronger the killing intent in his mind, the more terrifying the power of bloodline was. Now, the killing intent emitted from his body was unprecedentedly strong, even surpassing his sword intent. Moreover, every time he killed someone, his killing intent and the power of bloodline would increase. The more he killed, the stronger he would become. Grow in the midst of massacre. Of course, he could also die in the midst of massacre. When Yi Xian came here, he had already put his life and death aside. He had come here and completely activated the power of his bloodline just to do one thing: kill. After killing his way to the 27th heaven, those experts did not resist, but retreated. The current Yi Xian was unstoppable. And Yi Xian did not let these people go. Chase. Just like that, Yi Xian chased wildly, and the entire 27th heaven was filled with wails. Not long after, Yi Xian killed his way to the 33rd heaven. The spiritual energy here was much denser than below, and there was extremely pure energy of the stars. Yi Xian did not absorb the energy of the stars, but his body was indeed automatically absorbing the pure energy of the stars. After absorbing the energy of the stars, Yi Xian came to the entrance of the 34th heaven. At this moment, the blood sword in his hand trembled slightly. Yi Xian stopped. The sword spirit stopped Yi Xian. Yi Xian stood at the entrance in silence for a moment, then he turned and left. After Yi Xian left the 36th heaven, he came to a stretch of clouds. From his position, above those clouds, there were floating palaces. Doubting heaven palaces were 36, and 72 treasure halls were 72. Yi Xian suddenly disappeared on the spot. His target was the head of the treasure halls, Lingshao Hall. The Lingshao Hall was where the Tao ancestor resided. However, Yi Xian did not let go of the great halls and heavenly palaces he passed by. Wherever he went, there was chaos. Seeing Yi Xian rush to the numinous sky palace, Bai Dizzy's expression changed instantly. He had previously ordered the doubting powerhouses to avoid Yi Xian and not fight to the death with Yi Xian. They were to wait for the doubting powerhouses to return from the dual realm abyss. But now, he did not expect Yi Xian to go to Lingshao Hall. That was the place where the Tao ancestor lived. It was the dignity of the doubting. Bai Dizzy suddenly said, "Where are the 36 celestial stars?" Chi 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 chi, in an instant, streams of light shot into the sky from the doubting. Soon, the 36 super powerhouses suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Bai Dizzy was about to speak, but Yi Xian suddenly turned into a sword light and disappeared on the spot. In the distance, the 36 super powerhouses suddenly turned into 36 streams of light and shot toward Yi Xian. In the clouds, Yi Xian suddenly slashed down with his sword. Chi chi. A stretch of sword light and a heavenly waterfall swept down from the sky. Bai Dizzy's expression changed drastically when he saw this. Yi Xian had become stronger again. At this moment, a dazzling blood light suddenly burst out from the sky. Under this blood light, the 36 super powerhouses were shaken and retreated repeatedly. A single sword strike had forced back 36 Tao validation powerhouses. Seeing that the 36 super powerhouses still wanted to attack, Bai Dizzy suddenly said angrily, "Don't attack, retreat." At this moment, he'd noticed that Tao validation realm experts were utterly unable to harm Yi Xian. These 36 Tao validation realm experts had limitless futures, so they absolutely couldn't be allowed to die here. At the very least, they couldn't be allowed to die for nothing. The 36 celestial stars were just about to retreat when Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. Hiss! A strand of blood-red light flashed through the battlefield. The expressions of the 36 experts changed drastically when they witnessed this scene, and they retreated explosively. However, Yi Xian's sword was even swifter than them. Hiss! Yi Xian's sword pierced through the throat of one of the experts in the lead, and then his head instantly flew into the air while a strand of blood sprayed from it. Moreover, his soul and blood were instantly absorbed by Yi Xian. In the next moment, Yi Xian vanished on the spot again. It didn't take long for the sound of ripping to resound, and every single ripping sound was accompanied by a head flying into the air. They were bound to die as soon as they appeared here. Because their speed wasn't as fast as Yi Xian at all. Bai Dizzy stared fixedly at the blood-red light in the sky with an extremely unsightly expression on his face. Because he noticed that Yi Xian was much stronger than he was a moment ago. Exactly what sort of bloodline is that? Bai Dizzy's heart was filled with questions. because the people he'd sent still hadn't replied to him. This meant that they still hadn't found him. But with the strength that Dao Ting possessed, that was utterly impossible. Even Dao Ting had a pretty good understanding of the Dao Tomb, let alone a human at the self-release realm. At this moment, Yi Xian, who was far away in the sky, suddenly stopped. Around him were 36 withered corpses. Yi Xian's eyes were closed tightly while strands of formidable killing intent surged incessantly around him. The killing intent was so strong that it had completely crushed his sword intent. Moreover, killing people wasn't able to vent his anger. Conversely, it caused his killing intent to grow stronger and stronger. Even if he slaughtered all the worlds in the universe, it wouldn't be able to quench the hatred in his heart. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot, and the palaces in the distance were reduced to nothingness by the blood-red sword light. In a short while, Yi Xian arrived before the firmament hall. The firmament hall was made of glass, and it was 300 m tall and extremely dazzling. Behind Yi Xian was a ground full of corpses. Yi Xian looked at the firmament hall and suddenly slashed with his sword. Hiss! Everywhere the sword light passed, a sea of blood was left. Just as the blood-red sword light was about to strike the firmament hall, a ray of gold light suddenly struck the blood-red sword light. Bang! The sword light and the blood-red sword light shattered at the same time. On Yi Xian's right stood a man in golden armor and a longbow in his hand. One of the Dao Ting divine generals. Farewell. Wanbi looked at Yi Xian expressionlessly. At this moment, Bai Dizzy instantly heaved a sigh of relief. As if he thought of something, he suddenly said, Divine General, farewell, just hold this person back. Don't fight him head on. Wanbi glanced at Bai Dizzy and said, Lord Bai Xing, is he the one who killed Xian Yong? Bai Dizzy nodded. Yes. This person's bloodline power is extremely special. His current strength has increased by at least 10 times. Although he's at the self-release realm, with this bloodline power and the sword in his hand, his current combat strength isn't any weaker than a Dao-controlling realm expert. Wanbi glanced at the sword in Yi Xian's hand and said softly, This sword, Bai Dizzy said solemnly, the strength of this sword lies in the realm, not the body. This sword shouldn't be his sword. I wonder if it's Mu Niannian. At this moment, the distant Yi Xian suddenly turned into a sword light and disappeared. He slashed at Farewell. Farewell's expression was calm. The moment Yi Xian attacked, he suddenly drew his bow and released it. A golden arrow light tore through the air. Boom! This arrow forcibly blocked the distant Yi Xian, but the next moment, Yi Xian disappeared again. The moment Yi Xian disappeared, Farewell also disappeared. As soon as he disappeared, a sword stabbed at his position, and Yi Xian's sword pierced through thin air. The moment Yi Xian was about to withdraw his sword, a long arrow tore through the air and shot straight at his forehead. Yi Xian blocked it with his sword. Boom! The arrow was blocked, but Yi Xian retreated several hundred feet. The moment he stopped, another arrow tore through the air. And as soon as he stopped, another arrow tore through the air. Yi Xian took a step forward and thrust his sword forward. On the tip of the sword, a beam of sword light suddenly exploded. Along with the explosion, a golden arrow also exploded. However, there was another arrow behind this one. This arrow, Yi Xian was unable to block, and directly pierced his chest. Chi! The arrow entered half an inch. At this moment, Yi Xian's powerful physical body showed its effect. Seeing this, Lanbi in the distance frowned slightly. Such a powerful body, Yi Xian suddenly pulled out the arrow, and a stream of blood spurted out, but he quickly absorbed it. Yi Xian looked up at Farewell in the distance. At this moment, the seriousness in Farewell's eyes increased. Yi Xian suddenly disappeared, and the moment Yi Xian disappeared, Farewell also disappeared once again. Soon, there were many afterimages in the clouds. These afterimages could no longer be distinguished as Yi Xian's or others. In addition, there were also sword light and arrow light. Below, Bai Dizzy's expression was somewhat ugly. Although the two seemed to be equally matched, and neither could do anything to the other, he knew that Yi Xian actually had the upper hand. Right now, Farewell was constantly pulling away from Yi Xian, and once Yi Xian closed in on him, it would be the moment of his defeat. Right now, although Yi Xian could not close the distance, other arrows could not hurt Yi Xian either. Most importantly, Yi Xian was becoming stronger and stronger. If this continued, Farewell would definitely lose. As if thinking of something, Bai Dizzy suddenly turned his head and looked at the end of the horizon. He said softly, "The battle in the Two Realms Abyss is so intense. When he sent someone to pass the news of Polylore's death to True Martial Divine Lord, he should have known the seriousness of the matter. But now, the experts of the Two Realms Abyss had not come. This Farewell did not come from the Two Realms Abyss. Before that, Farewell had been in seclusion. When he saw that Yi Xian was coming to Numinous Sky Hall, he had sent someone to forcefully inform Farewell. Now, it was likely that Farewell would not be able to stop Yi Xian. At this moment, the sound of a sword suddenly rang in the sky. Then, a figure retreated rapidly. The person retreating was Farewell. In the process of retreating, Farewell drew his bow again and again, and more than a dozen arrows shot at Yi Xian from various angles. In the distance, Yi Xian suddenly waved his right hand, and in an instant, more than a dozen swords appeared around him. In the next moment, these swords transformed into more than a dozen beams of sword light and flew out. Sword Kinesis Flight. Sword Kinesis Flight alone could not compete with Farewell's arrows, but with the power of his bloodline and his sword domain, it was completely different. Long-range attack? So could Yi Xian. Pest. Flying swords and flying arrows crisscrossed in the sky above Numinous Sky Hall, and the sound of tearing kept ringing. The battle was in a stalemate. At this moment, Bai Dizzy suddenly turned his head, as if he had seen something. He suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. It's time to end this. At the end of the clouds, a middle-aged man slowly walked over. The middle-aged man held a long sword without a scabbard. The sword was dark purple, and a golden dragon swam along the blade. The sword let out a dragon's roar from time to time. The Dragon Song Sword. This sword contained the dragon's soul. When the sword was swung, the dragon's roar could be heard. Although this sword was only at the Tao Validation realm, with the addition of the dragon's soul, the sword's power far surpassed that of ordinary Tao Validation realm swords. On the middle-aged man's back, there was a sword case. The sword case was extraordinary. It was made of the dragon's bone and was indestructible. In the sword case, there were 10 divine swords. All 10 divine swords were made of dragon scales, and all of them were at the Tao Validation realm. Sealing the Tao. Doubting the dragon-slaying sword Immortal. Doubting the number 1 swordsman. Chapter 1343. Feng Daoxiu. Upon seeing this person, the White Emperor's son heaved a sigh of relief. Feng Daoxiu was not only at the Tao Defense realm, but he was also a swordsman and a super swordsman. It could be said that Feng Daoxiu was the most powerful person in Daoting except for the white-robed divine general. How could Yi Xian resist Feng Daoxiu and bidding? Feng Daoxiu stopped not far away. He glanced at Yi Xian and then looked at Bai Dizzy. Lord Tai Bai Jinxing, is this person the one? Bai Dizzy nodded. Feng Daoxiu was expressionless. Tell bidding to stop. I want to fight this person one-on-one. Bai Dizzy frowned slightly. Feng Daoxiu is a taboo for a martial artist to look down on his enemy. Feng Daoxiu shook his head. I'm not looking down on him. I just want to fight him one-on-one and have a fair fight. I want to see what this swordsman is capable of. Bai Dizzy shook his head. No, I order you to kill this person immediately. Feng Daoxiu frowned slightly. Bai Dizzy looked at Feng Daoxiu with a cold expression. Do you want me to report you to the true martial god? Feng Daoxiu's expression changed slightly. he did not dare to go against Bai Dizzy. Although Bai Dizzy was not very powerful, his official position was higher than his. Even his superior, the true martial god, had to be polite to Bai Dizzy. Feng Daoxiu cupped his fists. "I'll do it." After that, he looked at Yi Xian and Bidding, who were still fighting fiercely in the distance. The next moment, the dragon cry sword in his hands suddenly turned into a sword light and slashed out. There was the roar of a dragon's soul in the sword light. In the distance, Yi Xian suddenly turned his head and was about to block with his sword. How would Bidding give Yi Xian the chance to do so? In an instant, Bidding shot more than a dozen arrows. These arrows were as fast as lightning and arrived in front of Yi Xian in the blink of an eye. If Yi Xian blocked that sword, he would definitely be hit by the arrow. However, Yi Xian did not block the dragon's cry sword. He turned around and fiercely swung his sword. In an instant, all the other arrows were blocked. At this time, the dragon's cry sword had already arrived behind Yi Xian. At this time, it was already too late for Yi Xian to defend. The dragon's cry sword easily pierced into Yi Xian's back. Seeing this, the people in the distance immediately relaxed a little. He had to admit that Yi Xian was indeed difficult to deal with. If this continued, he would definitely lose. Because he couldn't outlast Yi Xian. Yi Xian was constantly getting stronger. When the dragon's cry sword stabbed into Yi Xian's back, Feng Daoxiu didn't stop because he still had another move. At practically the exact same moment, 10 divine swords shot into the sky from within the swordsman on his back. In the next moment, they shot through space and instantly arrived around Yi Xian. After that, they entered Yi Xian's body at practically the exact same moment as the dragon's cry sword. 11 sword strikes. From the moment he attacked until the end, his movements were completed in one smooth motion, and it wasn't flashy at all. At this moment, the surroundings suddenly fell silent. The rock that was hanging in by Dizzy's heart had finally been lifted. The vigilance in Bidding's eyes had vanished completely at this moment. Meanwhile, Feng Daoxiu suddenly shook his head. How boring. Right at this moment, Bai Dizzy seemed to have thought of something, and his pupils constricted. Watch out. At practically the exact same moment, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot, and it only took a moment for him to arrive in front of Bidding. Bidding's expression changed drastically when he witnessed this scene. What the hell? Bidding was caught off guard, and Bidding allowed Yi Xian to close in on him. How could a ranged attacker survive when an assassin closed in on him? Bidding didn't choose to retreat because it was too late now. He was just about to draw his bow when a sword suddenly stabbed into his chest. Bang! Bidding was instantly blasted over 1 kilometer away by the sword. Once Bidding stopped, he gazed at the sword in his chest. The soul suppression sword. Once it entered his body, his soul wouldn't even have a chance to escape. Bidding was slightly stunned, and he gazed at Yi Xian. At this moment, there were 11 swords stuck into Yi Xian's body, and there was even a sword stuck into his head. However, Yi Xian was fine. How could this be possible? At this moment, Feng Daoxiu was stunned as well. How could this be possible? Right at this moment, the swords on Yi Xian's body suddenly started to slowly disperse. He's absorbing them. Bidding stared fixedly at Yi Xian. He's absorbing the swords. Seeing his swords slowly disappear, Feng Daoxiu's face was filled with shock. How is this possible? In the distance, Bai Dizzy slowly closed his eyes. Regret. At this moment, Bai Dizzy was filled with regret. In fact, when he investigated Yi Xian previously, in Yi Xian's information, there was a mention of Yi Xian being able to absorb swords. However, he didn't take it seriously. This was because he thought that perhaps Yi Xian's constitution was a little special, and there was no powerful swordsman below, so Yi Xian could absorb swords. Therefore, he didn't take it seriously at all. However, he didn't expect that Yi Xian could even absorb swords of Dao validation state. After all, this Feng Daoxiu was not an ordinary swordsman. Even his swords could be absorbed. What kind of constitution was this? At this moment, Yi Xian had completely absorbed the 11 swords. Boom! An extremely powerful aura suddenly swept out from Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian's aura multiplied. The aura was so powerful that the space around him cracked. This was a direct breakthrough in quality. In the distance, Wanbi was stunned. He looked at Feng Daoxiu not far away and asked, "Were you sent by the other side?" As soon as he finished speaking, his soul was completely absorbed. He died. After his death, he didn't even close his eyes. He died with everlasting regret. He wasn't killed by Yi Xian. He was killed by his own people. In the distance, Feng Daoxiu's expression was extremely ugly. His 11 swords had been absorbed. 11 swords. Even the divine dragon's soul had been absorbed by Yi Xian. What was this? Feng Daoxiu looked at Bai Di Xingjun. Bai Dizzy stared at Yi Xian in the distance. Retreat. Retreat? Feng Daoxiu's expression suddenly turned ferocious. He suddenly waved his hands. 10,000 swords to the origin. In an instant, tens of thousands of flying swords suddenly appeared in the sky. Feng Daoxiu pointed angrily at Yi Xian, who was still absorbing the swords, and roared, "Slash!" As soon as he spoke, tens of thousands of swords suddenly pierced through the sky. In an instant, tens of thousands of swords directly drowned Yi Xian. Feng Daoxiu stared into the distance. Soon, his expression changed. Yi Xian was absorbing the swords. Those tens of thousands of swords were directly absorbed by Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian's aura suddenly skyrocketed. He became stronger again. Feng Daoxiu's face was extremely pale. His eyes were filled with disbelief. How is this possible? How is this possible? As if unwilling to give up, Feng Daoxiu was about to attack again. At this moment, Bai Dizzy suddenly roared angrily in the distance. "Stop it right now." Feng Daoxiu looked at Bai Dizzy. Bai Dizzy pointed into the distance. "Hurry up and get lost." Feng Daoxiu was speechless. Bai Dizzy suddenly roared angrily once more. "Do you want to die here?" Feng Daoxiu flew into a rage when he saw Bai Dizzy fly into a rage. "Don't talk nonsense. If you're so capable, why don't you attack?" Bai Dizzy glanced coldly at Feng Daoxiu. He did not say another word, and he retreated silently. On the other hand, Feng Daoxiu looked at Yi Xian in the distance with an extremely hideous expression. He opened his palm, and an energy sword appeared in his hand. In an instant, boundless spiritual energy in the heavens and the earth started to surge from this energy sword. Feng Daoxiu stared fixedly at Yi Xian. "I don't believe that you can absorb more." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly took a step forward. As soon as he took that step, the energy sword in his hand suddenly flew out and slashed. Hiss! A sword howl suddenly resounded through the sky. Under Feng Daoxiu's gaze, the energy sword slashed directly onto Yi Xian's body. Bang! Yi Xian's entire body shook, and then he shuddered. He seemed to be very comfortable. "I've been absorbed again." At this moment, Feng Daoxiu's face was ashen. How is this possible?" As he spoke, he charged directly at Yi Xian. In the next moment, numerous flying swords slashed towards Yi Xian. Every time Feng Daoxiu swung his sword, Yi Xian's aura would grow slightly stronger. At this moment, Feng Daoxiu had gone mad, and he attacked madly at Yi Xian. Around 15 minutes later, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. Feng Daoxiu's expression changed drastically. He was just about to attack when a sword had already pierced through the space between his brows. Hiss! Blood sprayed. Yi Xian appeared behind Feng Daoxiu, and then he clenched his right hand. The soul-suppressing sword flew out from Feng Daoxiu's body and descended firmly into his grasp. Feng Daoxiu's soul had been destroyed. After Yi Xian killed Feng Daoxiu with a single strike, he walked towards the firmament hall. There were 2 portraits on both sides of the firmament hall's door. The gatekeepers. Yi Xian had just arrived before the door when the two portraits suddenly opened their eyes. In the next moment, two rays of golden light slashed directly at Yi Xian. Yi Xian swung his sword horizontally from below. Hiss! The two rays of golden light shattered, and in the next moment, Yi Xian vanished on the spot. Hiss! Hiss! The heads of those two divine generals flew into the air. At the instant their heads hit the ground, Yi Xian had already entered the firmament hall. The hall was resplendent and extremely luxurious. After Yi Xian entered the hall, he glanced at the surroundings, and then he suddenly slashed with his sword. Hiss! A strand of sword light suddenly erupted from within the firmament hall. In an instant, the entire firmament hall shattered into pieces. Yi Xian had left the firmament hall, but he hadn't left. Instead, he had slaughtered madly throughout the Daoting Hall. He had slaughtered from the south to the north, and from the north to the south. The entire Daoting's 36 heavenly palaces and 72 palaces had been visited by him. For a time, the entire Daoting Hall was filled with wailing victims. About an hour later, Yi Xian returned to the heavenly gate. He sat paralyzed on the ground because there was no one left for him to kill. At this moment, Bai Dizzy suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian suddenly raised his head to look at Bai Dizzy. He picked up his sword and was about to attack. At this moment, Bai Dizzy suddenly said, "It was you who caused the death of the fifth dimension Tendo." There was a mysterious power in his voice, and this power directly penetrated deep into Yi Xian's body. At this moment, Yi Xian, who had lost his mind, suddenly stopped. Bai Dizzy stared at Yi Xian and said, "It was you who caused her death. If it wasn't for you, she wouldn't have died. She is already dead, so what right do you have to live in this world?" At this moment, two streams of bloody tears slowly flowed out from Yi Xian's eyes. Bai Dizzy continued, "She could have lived well, but it was because of you that she came to Daoting and used the last of her strength to fight to the death with us, the Daoting Dao ancestor. If it wasn't for you, how could she have died with her strength? It was you, Yi Xian, who caused her death." Killing heart. In the distance, Yi Xian's body suddenly began to tremble. He suddenly muttered, "It was I, who caused sister's death." Bai Dizzy suddenly roared in anger, "It was you." His voice was like a great bell, shaking the heavens. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly held the sword across his throat. He looked at the horizon, as if he had lost his soul. "It was me. I deserve to die." As his voice fell, he suddenly swiped. Chi! A stream of blood splattered out. Yi Xian slowly fell down. His left hand stretched out into the distance. In the horizon, he saw a woman smiling at him. In the woman's hand, there was a fish, but there was nothing in the horizon. Yi Xian suddenly grinned, "Nian, sister. In the next life, I will roast fish for you for a lifetime. P.S. Do you dare to vote?" Chapter 1344. Seeing the scene of Yi Xian lying down, Bai Dizzy, who was far away, suddenly laughed. He laughed very happily. A very steady god was now laughing like a child who had received a gift. Actually, he just wanted to give it a try. The battle in the two worlds abyss was in a stalemate. There was no one there, and the Daoting had to deal with the Tomb of Dao. Because if the Daoting retreated, the two worlds abyss would fall into the Tomb of Dao. At that time, the situation would be extremely disadvantageous for the Daoting. Therefore, Divine Lord True Marshal could not send the white-robed general and some other divine lords back. There was no other way. Therefore, he chose to use the words of death to deal with Yi Xian. He knew that the reason why Yi Xian slaughtered the Daoting powerhouses so crazily was because of Mu Nianyan. Guilt. At that moment, Yi Xian must be feeling extremely guilty. Therefore, Bai Dizzy wanted to try to arouse the guilt in Yi Xian's heart, and he succeeded. Yi Xian actually killed himself in front of him. This was really delightful. However, soon, the smile on Bai Dizzy's face froze. In the distance, a monstrous killing intent suddenly swept out from Yi Xian's body. This killing intent swept across the sky like a storm, then spread towards the entire Daoting. In an instant, the entire Daoting was shrouded by a killing intent. Bai Dizzy's face was full of disbelief. This is, at that moment, Yi Xian, who had been lying on the ground in the distance, suddenly stood up slowly. Not dead? Bai Dizzy stared at Yi Xian. This, at that moment, Yi Xian suddenly pointed his sword at the sky. Boom! A sword condensed from killing intent suddenly shot into the sky. In an instant, the entire space above the Dao Ting was shattered by that sword. After all, the space in the Dao court was extremely sturdy. Previously, Yi Xian's parting battle had not been able to shatter the surrounding space, but now, Yi Xian's sword had shattered the space so easily. As if he had thought of something, Bai Dizzy's face suddenly turned pale. Proving the way. You. Proving the way by killing, his voice was trembling. Killing to prove one's Dao. Killing intent rose, slaughtering the world. But what was the limit of killing intent? The ultimate killing intent was to kill oneself. A person who even wanted to kill himself, his killing intent was the most terrifying and extreme. At this moment, Bai Dizzy suddenly roared, "Impossible." From ancient times until now, all those who killed to prove their Dao had perished. You can't be alive. There were indeed people in history who used killing to prove their Dao. Killing oneself could indeed prove one's Dao, but since ancient times, it was only proven before one died. In the history of Daoting, there was one person who used killing to prove his Dao, and that person perished after proving his Dao. Proving one's Dao by killing was not something that could be achieved by pretending, it was a person who really wanted to kill himself. Without the real intention to commit suicide, it was impossible to prove one's Dao. Therefore, from ancient times until now, those who used killing to prove their Dao all perished at the same time. But now, Yi Xian was actually still alive. How was this possible? Soon, Bai Dizzy discovered the problem. He stared at Yi Xian, or more accurately, at the sword in Yi Xian's hand. Sword. This guy could absorb swords. It was impossible to kill him with swords. Moreover, he could not kill himself with swords. With his current sword Dao cultivation base and strength, only Mu Niannian could kill him with swords. An expert of that level. At this moment, Bai Dizzy suddenly slapped his face, "This dog mouth of mine." His old face instantly turned red and swollen. As if he felt that it was not enough, Bai Dizzy slapped his old face a few more times. Let Yi Xian commit suicide? At this moment, Bai Dizzy wanted to die. Damn it, what kind of stupid move did I make? I'm simply an idiot. Bai Dizzy was filled with regret. Yi Xian was only at self-release realm previously, but he could already kill Dao controlling realm experts. Now, Yi Xian reached Dao validation realm, and he used killing to prove his Dao. Using killing to prove his Dao. This method of proving one's Dao was extremely domineering and terrifying. It could be said that using the sword to prove one's Dao wasn't as terrifying as using killing to prove one's Dao. Once the intent to kill arose, who could resist it? The current Yi Xian, not to mention Dao controlling realm experts, even ordinary divine lords in Daoting were probably no match for him. The current Yi Xian was a great threat. Bai Dizzy took a deep look at Yi Xian, then left silently. In the distance, Yi Xian's eyes were closed tightly, and the killing intent around him was almost tangible. Killing domain. The fourth type of domain. Using killing to prove one's Dao, using killing to form a domain. At this moment, Yi Xian reached Dao validation realm without the help of a god seal. Not only that, but he also used killing to form a domain. In fact, he could directly use killing to prove one's Dao, not only because of his killing intent, but also because he had devoured those swords. 11 swords, that wasn't just any ordinary nourishment. Especially when that Feng Daoxiu even frantically increased his energy, before he used killing to prove one's Dao, his own strength had actually already reached a limit. At the moment when he committed suicide, killing intent arose, and coupled with the strength from before, he used killing to prove one's Tao. Now was the moment when he was at his peak. In the battlefield, Yi Xian released the killing intent in his body in a frenzy. His killing intent swept towards the surroundings, and at this moment, Dao Ting was enveloped by his killing intent. However, Yi Xian did not notice that the sword in his hand was also becoming stronger. The sword spirit. The sword that used to belong to the green-robed man. The strength of the three swords didn't lie in the sword, but in the person. The stronger the person, the stronger the sword. However, the sword spirit was different. Not only did it not have a cultivation, but it had once followed its former master and used killing to prove one's Tao. Although Yi Xian could not fully unleash its power, after using killing to prove one's Tao, Yi Xian could unleash at least 50% of its strength. The stronger the killing intent, the stronger the sword. Coupled with his blood domain and the power of his bloodline, his Tao of killing would be unprecedentedly powerful. Around 15 minutes later, Yi Xian slowly calmed down, but he still had not returned to normal. Yi Xian walked away with the sword in hand. Continue killing. Just like before, there was only one thought in his mind, and that was to kill. Kill everyone in Dao Ting. Leave no one alive. Yi Xian killed from the south to the north, then from the south to the west. In Dao Ting, he killed every living thing he saw. The entire Dao Ting was filled with corpses. Just as Yi Xian walked out of a palace with the sword in hand, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared in front of him. Yi Xian's killing intent disappeared without a trace when it was half a foot in front of the middle-aged man. The powerful killing intent could not even get close to the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man in front of him was the Tao ancestor who had gone into seclusion to heal his injuries. Beside the Tao ancestor was Bai Dizzy. The Tao ancestor looked at Yi Xian in the distance. You too. Brother and sister, each more demonic than the other. In fact, he had been doubting all along, but he did not come out earlier because the most important thing to him was to heal his injuries. Mu Niannian had seriously injured him and destroyed his body, which was very fatal to him. This was because Dao Ting had a mortal enemy, the Dao Tomb. Fortunately, the one in the Dao Tomb was in seclusion, or Dao Ting would be in danger. Therefore, he had to rebuild his body before the one in Dao Ting went into seclusion, so that he could recover to his peak condition. But now, he had no choice but to come out. Yi Xian had proven his Dao by killing. If it was just a normal Dao proving, he would not come out because Yi Xian could not threaten Dao Ting. However, proving his Dao by killing was different. Great killing intent. Why would he have such a great killing intent? Because Yi Xian wanted to destroy Dao Ting. How much killing intent and hatred did he have to prove his Dao? The Tao ancestor knew that he had to come out and kill Yi Xian. The current Yi Xian was no longer a threat to the Dao Tomb. If he was allowed to grow, Yi Xian would become the Dao Tomb's greatest enemy in the future. This was his intuition. The Tao ancestor looked at Yi Xian and slowly raised his right hand. It's over. As soon as he finished speaking, a powerful force suddenly appeared around him. As soon as this force appeared, the killing intent in the surroundings slowly dissipated. Bai Dizzy retreated to the side and looked at Yi Xian. This time, this guy should die, right? Although Yi Xian's current strength was unprecedentedly strong, the person in front of Yi Xian was the Tao ancestor. One of the strongest in the world. Yi Xian seemed to have sensed danger from afar. He held the sword spirit tightly in his right hand, and a powerful force swept out from within him. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian suddenly leaped up and slashed down with his sword. Hiss! A single slash could destroy the world. This slash tore the space in the surroundings apart. At this moment, the Tao ancestor suddenly threw a punch. It was a very ordinary punch, and there was not even the slightest energy fluctuation. However, in the instant that he threw that punch, the sword momentum of Yi Xian's sword instantly disappeared. At the same time, Yi Xian's entire body was sent flying. This time, he flew from the south gate to the north gate. As soon as Yi Xian landed on the ground, the space behind him turned into nothingness, and he spat out a few mouthfuls of blood essence. In front of the south gate, the Tao ancestor took a step forward. With one step, he came directly in front of Yi Xian. The Tao ancestor gazed at Yi Xian with an expressionless face. If your sister was here, then I would show her some respect. Unfortunately, she isn't here. But I won't give you any time or chance. As soon as he finished speaking, he smashed his fist forward once more. Yi Xian suddenly raised his head, roared furiously, and slashed down with his sword. 4 types of domains. Bang! As soon as his sword descended, the space here suddenly exploded apart, and Yi Xian retreated 30 kilometers. However, the Tao ancestor retreated a few meters as well. Bai Dizzy's expression became extremely solemn when he witnessed this scene. He'd repelled the Tao ancestor with a single strike of his sword. Bai Dizzy clenched his fists tightly. If Yi Xian doesn't die, then he'll definitely become a great calamity for the Daoting in the future. The Tao ancestor's eyes were filled with killing intent as well, and he stared at Yi Xian, who was 30 kilometers away. I really can't let you live. As soon as he finished speaking, he'd appeared in front of Yi Xian, and then he smashed his fist forward once more. Meanwhile, a woman suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian, and she smashed her fist forward as well. Bang! The force of the Tao ancestor's fist was instantly destroyed. At the same time, the Tao ancestor was blasted over 1 kilometer away. The Tao ancestor stared fixedly at the woman in the distance. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.